Section 11 of the Arabian Nights Entertainments, Vol.4. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Beth Blakely. The Arabian Nights Entertainments, Vol.4. Translated by Jonathan Scott. Section 11. The Story of the Sisters Who Envied Their Younger Sister. Part 3. Prince Perviz, on the 20th day after his departure, met the same dervish in the same place as his brother Bahman had done before him. He went directly up to him, and after he had saluted, asked him if he could tell him where to find the speaking bird, the singing tree, and the golden water. The dervish urged the same difficulties and remonstrances as he had done to Prince Bahman, telling him that a young gentleman, who very much resembled him, was with him a short time before, that overcome by his importunity and pressing instances, he had shown him the way, given him a guide, and told him how he should act to succeed, but that he had not seen him since, and doubted not but he had shared the same fate as all other adventurers. "Good dervish," answered Prince Perviz, "I know whom you speak of. He was my elder brother, and I am informed of the certainty of his death, but know not the cause." "I can tell you," replied the dervish. "He was changed into a black stone, as all I speak of have been, and you must expect the same transformation, unless you observe more exactly than he has done the advice I gave him, in case you persist in your resolution, which I once more entreat you to renounce." "Dervish," said Prince Perviz, "I cannot sufficiently express how much I am obliged for the concern you take in my life, who am a stranger to you, and have done nothing to deserve your kindness, but I thoroughly considered this enterprise before I undertook it, and I cannot now relinquish it. Therefore, I beg of you to do me the same favor you have done my brother. Perhaps I may have better success in following your directions." "Since I cannot prevail with you," said the dervish, "to give up your obstinate resolution, if my age did not prevent me, and I could stand, I would get up to reach you a bowl I have here, which will show you the way." Without giving the dervish time to say more, the prince alighted from his horse, and went to the dervish, who had taken a bowl out of his bag, in which he had a great many, and gave it him, with the same directions he had given Prince Bahman, and after warning him not to be discouraged by the voices he should hear without seeing anybody, however threatening they might be, but to continue his way up the hill till he saw the cage and bird, he let him depart. Prince Perviz thanked the dervish, and when he had remounted and taken leave, threw the bowl before his horse, and spurring him at the same time followed it. When the bowl came to the bottom of the hill it stopped. The prince alighted, and stood some time to recollect the dervish's directions. He encouraged himself and began to walk up with a resolution to reach the summit, but before he had gone above 6 steps he heard a voice, which seemed to be near, as of a man behind him, saying in an insulting tone, "Stay, rash youth, that I may punish you for your presumption." Upon this affront the prince, forgetting the dervish's advice, clapped his hand upon his sword, drew it, and turned about to revenge himself, but had scarcely time to see that nobody followed him before he and his horse were changed into black stones. In the meantime, the Princess Scheherazade, several times a day after her brother's departure, counted her chaplet. She did not omit it at night, but when she went to bed put it about her neck, and in the morning when she awoke counted over the pearls again to see if they would slide. The day that Prince Perviz was transformed into a stone, she was counting over the pearls as she used to do, when all at once they became immovably fixed, a certain token that the prince her brother was dead. As she had determined what to do in case it should happen so, she lost no time in outward demonstrations of grief, which she concealed as much as possible, but having disguised herself in a man's apparel, armed and equipped, she mounted her horse the next morning, having told her servants she should return in 2 or 3 days, and took the same road her brothers had done. The princess, who had been used to ride on horseback and hunting, supported the fatigue of so long a journey better than most ladies could have done, and as she made the same stages as her brothers, she also met with the dervish on the 20th day. When she came near him, she alighted off her horse, leading him by the bridle, went and sat down by the dervish, and after she had saluted him, said, "Good dervish, give me leave to rest myself, and do me the favor to tell me if you have not heard that there are somewhere in this neighborhood a speaking bird, a singing tree, and golden water." "Princess," answered the dervish, "for so I must call you, since by your voice I know you to be a woman disguised in a man's apparel. I thank you for your compliment, and receive the honor you do me with great pleasure. I know the place well where these things are to be found. But what makes you ask me this question?" "Good dervish," replied the princess, "I have had such a flattering relation of them given to me, that I have a great desire to possess them." "Madam," replied the dervish, "you have been told the truth. These curiosities are more singular and surprising than they have been represented to you, but you have not been made acquainted with the difficulties which must be surmounted in order to obtain them. If you had been fully informed of these, you would not have undertaken so troublesome and dangerous an enterprise. Take my advice, go no farther, return, and do not urge me to contribute towards your ruin." "Good father," said the princess, "I have traveled a great way, and should be sorry to return without executing my design. You talk of difficulties and danger of life, but you do not tell me what those difficulties are, and wherein the danger consists. This is what I desire to know, that I may consider and judge whether I can trust my courage and strength to brave them." The dervish repeated to the princess what he had said to the princes Bahman and Perviz, exaggerating the difficulties of climbing up to the top of the mountain, where she was to make herself mistress of the bird, which would inform her of the singing tree and golden water. He magnified the noise and din of the terrible threatening voices which she would hear on all sides of her, without seeing anybody, and the great number of black stones, alone sufficient to strike terror. He entreated her to reflect that those stones were so many brave gentlemen, so metamorphosed for having omitted to observe the principal condition of success in the perilous undertaking, which was not to look behind them before they had got possession of the cage. When the dervish had done, the princess replied, "By what I comprehend from your discourse, the difficulties of succeeding in this affair are, first, the getting up to the cage without being frightened at the terrible din of voices I shall hear, and secondly, not to look behind me. For this last, I hope I shall be mistress enough of myself to observe it. As to the first, I own that those voices, such as you represent them to be, are capable of striking terror into the most undaunted. But as in all enterprises and dangers, every one may use stratagem. I desire to know of you if I may use any in one of so great importance." "And what stratagem is it you would employ?" said the dervish. "To stop my ears with cotton," answered the princess, "that the voices, however loud and terrible, may make the less impression upon my imagination, and my mind remain free from that disturbance which might cause me to lose the use of my reason." "Princess," replied the dervish, "of all the persons who have addressed themselves to me for information, I do not know that ever one made use of the contrivance you propose. All I know is, that they all perished. If you persist in your design, you may make the experiment. You will be fortunate if it succeeds, but I would advise you not to expose yourself to the danger." "My good father," replied the princess, "nothing can hinder my persisting in my design. I am sure my precaution will succeed, and am resolved to try the experiment. Nothing remains for me but to know which way I must go. I conjure you not to deny me the favor of that information." The dervish exhorted her again for the last time to consider well what she was going to do, but finding her resolute, he took out a bowl, and presenting it to her, said, "Take this bowl, mount your horse again, and when you have thrown it before you, follow it through all its windings till it stops at the bottom of the mountain. There alight and ascend the hill. Go, you know the rest." After the princess had thanked the dervish and taken her leave of him, she mounted her horse, threw the bowl before her, and followed it till it stopped at the foot of the mountain. The princess alighted, stopped her ears with cotton, and after she had well examined the path leading to the summit, began with a moderate pace, and walked up with intrepidity. She heard the voices, and perceived the great service the cotton was to her. The higher she went, the louder and more numerous the voices seemed, but they were not capable of making any impression upon her. She heard a great many affronting speeches, and raillery very disagreeable to a woman, which she only laughed at. "I mind not," she said to herself. "All that can be said, were it worse. I only laugh at them, and shall pursue my way." At last she got so high that she could perceive the cage and the bird, which endeavored with the voices to frighten her, crying in a thundering tone, notwithstanding the smallness of its size, "Retire, fool, and approach no nearer." The princess, encouraged by this object, redoubled her speed, and by effort gained the summit of the mountain, where the ground was level. Then running directly to the cage and clapping her hand upon it, cried, "Bird, I have you, and you shall not escape me." While Scheherazade was pulling the cotton out of her ears, the bird said to her, "Heroic princess, be not angry with me for joining with those who exerted themselves to preserve my liberty. Though in a cage, I was content with my condition. But since I am destined to be a slave, I would rather be yours than any other person's, since you have obtained me so courageously. From this instant I swear inviolable fidelity, and an entire submission to all your commands. I know who you are, you do not, but the time will come when I shall do you essential service, which I hope you will think yourself obliged to me for. As a proof of my sincerity, tell me what you desire, and I am ready to obey you." The princess's joy was the more inexpressible because the conquest she had made had cost her the lives of 2 beloved brothers, and given her more trouble and danger than she could have imagined, notwithstanding what the dervish had represented to her. "Bird," said she, "it was my intention to have told you that I wish for many things which are of importance, but I am overjoyed that you have shown your goodwill and prevented me. I have been told that there is not far off a golden water, the property of which is very wonderful. Before all things, I ask you tell me where it is." The bird showed her the place, which was just by, and she went and filled a little silver flagon which she had brought with her. She returned to the bird and said, "Bird, this is not enough. I want also the singing tree. Tell me where it is." "Turn about," said the bird, "and you will see behind you a wood, where you will find this tree." The princess went into the wood, and by the harmonious concert she heard soon knew the tree among many others, but it was very large and high. She came back to the bird and said to it, "Bird, I have found the singing tree, but I can neither pull it up by the roots nor carry it." The bird replied, "It is not necessary that you should take it up by the roots. It will be sufficient to break off a branch and carry it to plant in your garden. It will take root as soon as it is put into the earth, and in a little time will grow to as fine a tree as that you have seen." When the princess had obtained possession of the 3 things which the devout woman had told her of, and for which she had conceived so great a desire, she said again to the bird, "Bird, what you have yet done for me is not sufficient. You have been the cause of the death of my 2 brothers, who must be among the black stones which I saw as I ascended the mountain. I wish to take them home with me." The bird seemed reluctant to satisfy the princess in this point, and indeed made some difficulty to comply. "Bird," said the princess, "remember you told me that you were my slave. You are so, and your life is in my disposal." "That I cannot deny," answered the bird, "but although what you now ask is more difficult than all the rest, yet I will do it for you. Cast your eyes around," added he, "and look if you can see a little pitcher." "I see it already," said the princess. "Take it then," he said, "and as you descend the mountain, sprinkle a little of the water that is in it upon every black stone." The princess took up the pitcher accordingly, carried with her the cage and the bird, the flagon of golden water, and the branch of the singing tree, and as she descended the mountain threw a little of the water on every black stone, which was changed immediately into a man. And as she did not miss one stone, all the horses, both of the princess her brothers, and of the other gentlemen, resumed their natural forms. She instantly recognized Bahman and Perviz as they did her, and ran to embrace her. She returned their embraces and expressed her amazement. "What do you here, my dear brothers?" said she. They told her they had been asleep. "Yes," she replied, "and if it had not been for me, perhaps you might have slept till the day of judgment. Do not you remember that you came to fetch the speaking bird, the singing tree, and the yellow water? And did you not see, as you came along, the place covered with black stones? Look and see if there be any now. The gentlemen and their horses who surround us, and you yourselves, were these black stones. If you desire to know how this wonder was performed," continued she, showing the pitcher, which she set down at the foot of the mountain, having no further use for it, "it was done by the virtue of the water which was in this pitcher, with which I sprinkled every stone. After I had made the speaking bird, which you see in this cage, my slave, by his directions I found out the singing tree, a branch of which I now have in my hand, and the yellow water, which this flagon is filled with. But being still unwilling to return without taking you with me, I constrained the bird by the power I had over him to afford me the means. He told me where to find this pitcher, and the use I was to make of it." The princes Bahman and Perviz learned by this relation the obligation they had to the princess their sister, as did all the other gentlemen who were collected around, and expressed to the princess that far from envying her happiness in the conquest she had made, and which they had all aspired to, they thought they could not any otherwise acknowledge the favor she had done them, or better express their gratitude to her for restoring them to life again, than by declaring themselves all her slaves, and that they were ready to obey her in whatever she should command. "Gentlemen," replied the princess, "if you had given any attention to my words, you might have observed that I had no other intention in what I have done than to recover my brothers. Therefore, if you have received any benefit, you owe me no obligation, and I have no further share in your compliment than your politeness towards me, for which I return you my thanks. In other respects, I regard each of you individually as free as you were before your misfortunes, and I rejoice with you all the happiness which has accrued to you by my means. Let us, however, stay no longer in a place where we have nothing to detain us, but mount our horses and return to our respective homes." The princess took her horse, which stood in the place where she had left him. Before she mounted, Prince Bahman desired her to give him the cage to carry. "Brother," replied the princess, "the bird is my slave, and I will carry him myself. If you will take the pains to carry the branch of the singing tree, there it is. Only hold the cage while I get on horseback." When she had mounted her horse, and Prince Bahman had given her the cage, she turned about and said to Prince Perviz, "I leave the flagon of golden water to your care, if it will not be too much trouble for you to carry it." Prince Perviz took charge of it with pleasure. When Bahman, Perviz, and all the gentlemen had mounted their horses, the princess waited for some of them to lead the way. The two princes paid that compliment to the gentlemen, and they again to the princess, who, finding that none of them would accept the honor, but that it was reserved for her, addressed herself to them and said, "Gentlemen, I expect that some of you should lead the way." To which one who was nearest to her, in the name of the rest, replied, "Madam, we were ignorant of the respect due to your sex, yet after what you have done for us there is no deference we will not willingly pay to you, notwithstanding your modesty. We entreat you no longer to deprive us of the happiness of following you." "Gentlemen," said the princess, "I do not deserve the honor you do me, and accept it only because you desire it." At the same time she led the way, and the two princes and the gentlemen followed. The illustrious company called upon the dervish as they passed to thank him for his reception and wholesome advice, which they had all found to be sincere. But he was dead, whether of old age or because he was no longer necessary to show the way to the obtaining the 3 rarities which the Princess Scheherazade had secured, did not appear. They pursued their route, but lessened in their numbers every day. The gentlemen who, as we said before, had come from different countries, after severally repeating their obligations to the princess and her brothers, took leave of them one after another as they approached the road they had come. As soon as the princess reached home, she placed the cage in the garden, and the bird no sooner began to warble than he was surrounded by nightingales, chaffinches, larks, linnets, goldfinches, and every species of birds of the country. And the branch of the singing tree was no sooner set in the midst of the parterre, a little distance from the house, than it took root, and in a short time became a large tree, the leaves of which gave as harmonious a concert as those of the tree from which it was gathered. A large basin of beautiful marble was placed in the garden, and when it was finished, the princess poured into it all the yellow water from the flagon, which instantly increased and swelled so much that it soon reached up to the edges of the basin, and afterwards formed in the middle a fountain 20 feet high, which fell again into the basin perpetually without running over. The report of these wonders was presently spread abroad, and as the gates of the house and those of the gardens were shut to nobody, a great number of people came to admire them. Some days after, when the Princes Bahman and Perviz had recovered from the fatigue of their journey, they resumed their former way of living, and as their usual diversion was hunting, they mounted their horses and went for the first time since their return, not to their own domain, but 2 or 3 leagues from their house. As they pursued their sport, the Emperor of Persia came in pursuit of game upon the same ground. When they perceived by the number of horsemen in different places that he would soon be up, they resolved to discontinue their chase and retire to avoid encountering him. But in the very road they took, they chanced to meet him, in so narrow a way that they could not retreat without being seen. In their surprise, they had only time to alight and prostrate themselves before the Emperor, without lifting up their heads to look at him. The Emperor, who saw they were as well mounted and dressed as if they had belonged to his court, had the curiosity to see their faces. He stopped and commanded them to rise. The princes rose up and stood before him with an easy and graceful air, accompanied with respectful, modest countenances. The Emperor took some time to view them before he spoke, and after he had admired their good air and mien, asked them who they were and where they lived. "Sir," said Prince Bahman, "we are the sons of the late intendant of your Majesty's gardens, and live in a house which he built a little before he died, till we should be fit to serve your Majesty, and ask of you some employ when opportunity offered." "By what I perceive," replied the Emperor, "you love hunting." "Sir," replied Prince Bahman, "it is our common exercise, and what none of your Majesty's subjects who intend to bear arms in your armies ought, according to the ancient custom of the kingdom, to neglect." The Emperor, charmed with so prudent an answer, said, "Since it is so, I should be glad to see your expertness in the chase. Choose your own game." The princes mounted their horses again and followed the Emperor, but had not gone far before they saw many wild beasts together. Prince Bahman chose a lion, and Prince Perviz a bear, and pursued them with so much intrepidity that the Emperor was surprised. They came up with their game nearly at the same time, and darted their javelins with so much skill and address that they pierced, the one the lion and the other the bear, so effectually that the Emperor saw them fall one after the other. Immediately afterwards Prince Bahman pursued another bear, and Prince Perviz another lion, and killed them in a short time, and would have beaten out for fresh game, but the Emperor would not let them, and sent them to come to him. When they approached, he said, "If I would have given you leave, you would have soon destroyed all my game. But it is not that which I would preserve, but your persons. For I am so well assured your bravery may one time or other be serviceable to me, that from this moment your lives will always be dear to me." The Emperor, in short, conceived so great a kindness for the 2 princes that he invited them immediately to make him a visit, to which Prince Bahman replied, "Your Majesty does us an honor we do not deserve, and we beg you will excuse us." The Emperor, who could not comprehend what reason the princes could have to refuse this token of his favor, pressed them to tell him why they excused themselves. "Sir," said Prince Bahman, "we have a sister younger than ourselves, with whom we live in such perfect union that we undertake nothing before we consult her, nor she anything without asking our advice." "I commend your brotherly affection," answered the Emperor. "Consult your sister, meet me here tomorrow, and give me an answer." End of section 11. Recording by Beth Blakely. By Jonathan Scott. Section 12. The Story of the Sisters Who Envied Their Younger Sister. Part 4. The princes went home, but neglected to speak of their adventure in meeting the Emperor and hunting with him, and also of the honor he had done them by asking them to go home with him, yet did not the next morning fail to meet him at the place appointed. "Well," said the Emperor, "have you spoken to your sister? And has she consented to the pleasure I expect of seeing you?" The two princes looked at each other and blushed. "Sir," said Bahman, "we beg your majesty to excuse us, for both my brother and I forgot." "Then remember today," replied the Emperor, "and be sure to bring me an answer tomorrow." The princes were guilty of the same fault a second time, and the Emperor was so good-natured as to forgive their negligence. But to prevent their forgetfulness the third time, he pulled 3 golden balls out of a purse and put them into Prince Bahman's bosom. "These balls," said he, smiling, "will prevent your forgetting a third time what I wish you to do for my sake, since the noise they will make by falling on the floor when you undress will remind you, if you do not recollect it before." The event happened just as the Emperor foresaw, and without these balls the princes had not thought of speaking to their sister of this affair. For as Prince Bahman unloosened his girdle to go to bed, the balls dropped on the floor, upon which he ran into Prince Perviz's chamber. When both went into the Princess Scheherazade's apartment, and after they had asked her pardon for coming at so unseasonable a time, they told her all the circumstances of their meeting the Emperor. The princess was somewhat surprised at this intelligence. "Your meeting with the Emperor," said she, "is happy and honorable, and may in the end be highly advantageous to you, but it is very disagreeable and distrustful to me. It was on my account, I know, you refused the Emperor, and I am infinitely obliged to you for doing so. I know by this your affection is equal to my own, since you would rather be guilty of incivility towards the Emperor than violate the brotherly union we have sworn to each other. You judge right, for if you had once gone, you would insensibly have been engaged to leave me, to devote yourselves to him. But do you think it an easy matter absolutely to refuse the Emperor what he seems so earnestly to desire? Monarchs will be obeyed in their desires, and it may be dangerous to oppose them. Therefore, if to follow my inclination I should dissuade you from showing the complaisance he expects from you, it may expose you to his resentment, and may render myself and you miserable. These are my sentiments, but before we conclude upon anything, let us consult the speaking bird, and hear what he says. He is penetrating, and has promised his assistance in all difficulties." The princess sent for the cage, and after she had related the circumstances to the bird in the presence of her brothers, asked him what they should do in this perplexity. The bird answered, "The princes your brothers must conform to the Emperor's pleasure, and in their turn invite him to come and see your house." "But, bird," replied the princess, "my brothers and I love one another, and our friendship is yet undisturbed. Will not this step be injurious to that friendship?" "Not at all," replied the bird. "It will tend rather to cement it." "Then," answered the princess, "the Emperor will see me." The bird told her it was necessary he should, and that everything would go better afterwards. Next morning the princes met the Emperor hunting, who at as great a distance as he could make himself be heard, asked them if they had remembered to speak to their sister. Prince Bahman approached, and answered, "Sir, your majesty may dispose of us as you please. We are ready to obey you, for we have not only obtained our sister's consent with great ease, but she took it amiss that we should pay her that deference in a matter wherein our duty to your majesty was concerned. But if we have offended, we hope you will pardon us." "Do not be uneasy on that account," replied the Emperor. "So far from taking amiss what you have done, I highly approve of your conduct, and hope you will have the same deference and attachment to my person, if I have ever so little share in your friendship." The princes, confounded at the Emperor's goodness, returned no other answer but a low obeisance, to show the great respect with which they received it. The Emperor, contrary to his usual custom, did not hunt long that day. Presuming that the princes possessed wit equal to their courage and bravery, he longed with impatience to converse with them more at liberty. He made them ride on each side of him, an honor which, without speaking of the principal courtiers who accompanied him, was envied by the Grand Vizier, who was much mortified to see them preferred before him. When the Emperor entered his capital, the eyes of the people who stood in the crowds in the streets were fixed upon the two princes Bahman and Perviz, and they were earnest to know who they might be, whether foreigners or natives. All, however, agreed in wishing that the emperor had been blessed with 2 such handsome princes, and said, he might have had children as old if the queen, who had suffered the punishment of her misfortune, had been more fortunate in her lyings-in. The first thing that the emperor did when he arrived at his palace was to conduct the princes into the principal apartments, who praised without affectation, like persons conversant in such matters, the beauty and symmetry of the rooms, and the richness of the furniture and ornaments. Afterwards a magnificent repast was served up, and the emperor made them sit with him, which they at first refused, but finding it was his pleasure they obeyed. The emperor, who had himself much learning, particularly in history, foresaw that the princes, out of modesty and respect, would not take the liberty of beginning any conversation. Therefore, to give them an opportunity, he furnished them with subjects all dinner time, but whatever subject he introduced, they showed so much wit, judgment, and discernment that he was struck with admiration. Were these my own children, said he to himself, and I had improved their talents by suitable education, they could not have been more accomplished or better informed. In short, he took such great pleasure in their conversation that after having sat longer than usual, he led them into his closet, where he pursued this conversation with them, and at last said, I never supposed that there were among my subjects in the country youths so well brought up, so lively, so capable, and I never was better pleased with any conversation than yours. But it is time now we should relax our minds with some diversion, and as nothing is more capable of enlivening the mind than music, you shall hear a vocal and instrumental concert which may not be disagreeable to you. The emperor had no sooner spoken for them than the musicians, who had orders to attend, entered, and answered fully the expectations the princes had been led to entertain of their abilities. After the concerts an excellent farce was acted, and the entertainment was concluded by dancers of both sexes. The 2 princes, seeing night approach, prostrated themselves at the emperor's feet, and having first thanked him for the favors and honors he had heaped upon them, asked his permission to retire, which was granted by the emperor, who in dismissing them said, I give you leave to go, but remember, I brought you to the palace myself only to show you the way. You will be always welcome, and the oftener you come, the greater pleasure you will do me. Before they went out of the emperor's presence, Prince Bahman said, Sir, may we presume to request that your majesty will do us and our sister the honor to pass by our house, and rest and refresh yourself after your fatigue, the first time you take the diversion of hunting in that neighborhood? It is not worthy of your presence, but monarchs sometimes have vouchsafed to take shelter in a cottage. My children, replied the emperor, your house cannot be otherwise than beautiful and worthy of its owners. I will call and see it with pleasure, which will be the greater for having my hosts you and your sister, who is already dear to me from the account you give me of the rare qualities with which she is endowed. And this satisfaction I will defer no longer than tomorrow. Early in the morning I will be at the place where I shall never forget that I first saw you. Meet me, and you shall be my guides. When the Princes Bahman and Perviz had returned home, they gave the princess an account of the distinguished reception the emperor had given them, and told her that they had invited him to do them the honor, as he passed by, to call at their house, and that he had appointed the next day. If it be so, replied the princess, we must think of preparing a repast fit for his majesty, and for that purpose I think it would be proper we should consult the speaking bird. He will tell us perhaps what meats the emperor likes best. The princes approved of her plan, and after they had retired she consulted the bird alone. Bird, said she, the emperor will do us the honor tomorrow to come and see our house, and we are to entertain him. Tell us what we shall do to acquit ourselves to his satisfaction. Good mistress, replied the bird, you have excellent cooks. Let them do the best they can, but above all things, let them prepare a dish of cucumbers stuffed full of pearls, which must be set before the emperor in the first course before all the other dishes. Cucumbers stuffed full of pearls! Cried Princess Scheherazade with amazement. Surely, bird, you do not know what you say. It is an unheard of dish. The emperor may admire it as a piece of magnificence, but he will sit down to eat, not to admire pearls. Besides, all the pearls I possess are not enough for such a dish. Mistress, said the bird, do what I say, and be not uneasy about what may happen. Nothing but good will follow. As for the pearls, go early tomorrow morning to the foot of the first tree on your right hand in the park. Dig under it, and you will find more than you want. That night the princess ordered a gardener to be ready to attend her, and the next morning early led him to the tree which the bird had told her of, and bade him dig at its foot. When the gardener came to a certain depth, he found some resistance to the spade, and presently discovered a gold box about a foot square, which he showed the princess. This, said she, is what I brought you for. Take care not to injure it with the spade. When the gardener took up the box, he gave it into the princess's hands. who, as it was only fastened with neat little hasps, soon opened it and found it full of pearls of a moderate size, but equal and fit for the use that was to be made of them. Very well satisfied with having found this treasure, after she had shut the box again, she put it under her arm and went back into the house, while the gardener threw the earth into the hole at the foot of the tree as it had been before. The princes, Bahman and Perviz, who as they were dressing themselves in their own apartments, saw the princess, their sister, in the garden earlier than usual, as soon as they could get out, went to her, and met her as she was returning, with a gold box under her arm, which much surprised them. "Sister," said Bahman, "you carried nothing with you when we saw you before with the gardener, and now we see you have a golden box. Is this some treasure found by the gardener, and did he come to tell you of it?" "No, brother," answered the princess. "I took the gardener to the place where this casket was concealed, and showed him where to dig, but you will be more amazed when you see what it contains." The princess opened the box, and when the princes saw that it was full of pearls, which though small were of great value, they asked her how she came to the knowledge of this treasure. "Brothers," said she, "if nothing more pressing calls you elsewhere, come with me and I will tell you." "What more pressing business," said Prince Perviz, "can we have than to be informed of what concerns us so much? We have nothing to do to prevent our attending you." The princess, as they returned to the house, gave them an account of her having consulted the bird, as they had agreed she should, and the answer he had given her, the objection she had raised to preparing the dish of cucumbers stuffed full of pearls, and how he had told her where to find this box. The princes and princess formed many conjectures to penetrate into what the bird could mean by ordering them to prepare such a dish, and after much conversation, though they could not by any means guess at his reason, they nevertheless agreed to follow his advice exactly. As soon as the princess entered the house, she called for the head cook, and after she had given him directions about the entertainment for the emperor, said to him, "Besides all this, you must dress an extraordinary dish for the emperor's own eating, which nobody else must have anything to do with besides yourself. This dish must be of cucumbers stuffed with these pearls." And at the same time she opened him the box, and showed him the pearls. The chief cook, who had never heard of such a dish, started back, and showed his thoughts by his looks, which the princess penetrating said, "I see you take me to be mad to order such a dish, which you have never heard of, and which one may say with certainty was never made. I know this as well as you, but I am not mad, and give you these orders with the most perfect recollection. You must invent and do the best you can, and bring me back what pearls are left." The cook could make no reply, but took the box and retired, and afterwards the princess gave directions to all the domestics to have everything in order, both in the house and gardens, to receive the emperor. Next day the two princes went to the place appointed, and as soon as the Emperor of Persia arrived the chase began, which lasted till the heat of the sun obliged him to leave off. While Prince Bahman stayed to conduit the emperor to their house, Prince Perviz rode before to show the way, and when he came in sight of the house, spurred his horse to inform the Princess Scheherazade that the emperor was approaching. But she had been told by some servants, whom she had placed to give notice, and the prince found her waiting ready to receive him. When the emperor had entered the courtyard and alighted at the portico, the princess came and threw herself at his feet, and the two princes informed him she was their sister, and besought him to expect her respects. The emperor stooped to raise her, and after he had gazed some time on her beauty, struck with her fine person and dignified air, he said, "The brothers are worthy of the sister, and she worthy of them, since if I may judge of her understanding by her person, I am not amazed that the brothers would do nothing without their sister's consent. But," added he, "I hope to be better acquainted with you, my daughter, after I have seen the house." "Sir," said the princess, "it is only a plain country residence, fit for such people as we are, who live retired from the great world. It is not to be compared with houses in great cities, much less with the magnificent palaces of emperors." "I cannot perfectly agree with you in opinion," said the emperor very obligingly, "for its first appearance makes me suspect you. However, I will not pass my judgment upon it till I have seen it all. Therefore, be pleased to conduct me through the apartments." The princess led the emperor through all the rooms except the hall, and after he had considered them very attentively and admired their variety, "My daughter," said he to the princess, "do you call this a country house? The finest and largest cities would soon be deserted if all country houses were like yours. I am no longer surprised that you take so much delight in it, and despise the town. Now let me see the garden, which I doubt not is answerable to this house." The princess opened a door which led into the garden, and the first object which presented itself to the emperor's view was the golden fountain. Surprised at so rare an object, he asked from whence that wonderful water, which gave so much pleasure to behold, had been procured. Where was its source, and by what art was it made to play so high that he thought nothing in the world was to be compared to it? He said he would presently take a nearer view of it. The princess then led him to the spot where the harmonious tree was planted, and there the emperor heard a concert, different from all he had ever heard before, and stopping to see where the musicians were, he could discern nobody far or near, but still distinctly heard the music, which ravished his senses. "My daughter," said he to the princess, "where are the musicians whom I hear? Are they underground or invisible in the air? Such excellent performers will hazard nothing by being seen. On the contrary, they would please the more." "Sir," answered the princess, smiling, "they are not musicians, but the leaves of the trees your majesty sees before you, which form this concert, and if you will give yourself the trouble to go a little nearer, you will be convinced, and the voices will be the more distinct." The emperor went nearer, and was so charmed with the sweet harmony that he would never have been tired with hearing it, but that his desire to have a nearer view of the fountain of the yellow water forced him away. "Daughter," said he, "tell me, I pray you, whether this wonderful tree was found in your garden by chance, or was it a present made to you, or have you procured it from some foreign country? It must certainly have come from a great distance. Otherwise, curious as I am after natural rarities, I should have heard of it. What name do you call it by?" "Sir," replied the princess, "this tree has no other name than that of the singing tree, and is not a native of this country. It would at present take up too much time to tell your majesty by what adventures it came here. Its history is connected with the yellow water and the speaking bird, which came to me at the same time, and which your majesty may see after you have taken a nearer view of the golden water. But if it be agreeable to your majesty, after you have rested yourself and recovered the fatigue of hunting, which must be the greater because of the sun's intense heat, I will do myself the honor of relating it to you." "My daughter," replied the emperor, "my fatigue is so well recompensed by the wonderful things you have shown me, that I do not feel it the least. I think only of the trouble I give you. Let us finish by seeing the yellow water. I am impatient to see and admire the speaking bird." When the emperor came to the yellow water, his eyes were fixed so steadfastly upon the fountain that he could not take them off. At last, addressing himself to the princess, he said, "As you tell me, daughter, that this water has no spring or communication, I conclude that it is foreign, as well as the singing tree." "Sir," replied the princess, "it is as your majesty conjectures, and to let you know that this water has no communication with any spring, I must inform you that the basin is one entire stone, so that the water cannot come in at the sides or underneath. But what your majesty will think most wonderful is that all of this water proceeded but from one small flagon, emptied into this basin, which increased to the quantity you see by a property peculiar to itself, and formed this fountain." "Well," said the emperor, going from the fountain, "this is enough for one time. I promise myself the pleasure to come and visit it often. But now let us go and see the speaking bird." As he went towards the hall, the emperor perceived a prodigious number of singing birds in the trees around, filling the air with their songs and warblings, and asked why there were so many there and none on the other trees in the garden. "The reason, sir," answered the princess, "is because they come from all parts to accompany the song of the speaking bird, which your majesty may see in a cage in one of the windows of the hall we are approaching. And if you attend, you will perceive that his notes are sweeter than those of any of the other birds, even the nightingale." The emperor went into the hall, and as the bird continued singing, the princess raised her voice and said, "My slave, here is the emperor. Pay your compliments to him." The bird left off singing that instant, when all the other birds ceased also, and it said, "The emperor is welcome. God prosper him and prolong his life." As the entertainment was served on the sofa near the window where the bird was placed, the sultan replied as he was taking his seat, "Bird, I thank you, and am overjoyed to find in you the sultan and king of birds." As soon as the emperor saw the dish of cucumbers set before him, thinking it was stuffed in the best manner, he reached out his hand and took one, but when he cut it, was in extreme surprise to find it stuffed with pearls. "What novelty is this?" said he, "and with what design were these cucumbers stuffed thus with pearls, since pearls are not to be eaten?" He looked at the two princes and princess to ask them the meaning, when the bird, interrupting him, said, "Can your majesty be in such great astonishment at cucumbers stuffed with pearls, which you see with your own eyes, and yet so easily believe that the queen your wife was delivered of a dog, a cat, and a piece of wood?" "I believed these things," replied the emperor, "because the midwives assured me of the facts." "Those midwives, sir," replied the bird, "were the queen's two sisters, who, envious of her happiness in being preferred by your majesty before them, to satisfy their envy and revenge, have abused your majesty's credulity. If you interrogate them, they will confess their crime. The 2 brothers and the sister whom you see before you are your own children, whom they exposed, and who were taken in by the intendant of your gardens, who provided nurses for them and took care of their education." This speech of the birds presently cleared up the Emperor's understanding. "Bird," cried he, "I believe the truth which you discovered to me. The inclination which drew me to them told me plainly they must be my own blood. Come then, my sons, come, my daughter, let me embrace you and give you the first marks of a father's love and tenderness." The Emperor then rose, and after having embraced the 2 princes and the princess, and mingled his tears with theirs, said, "It is not enough, my children. You must embrace each other, not as the children of the intendant of my gardens, to whom I have been so much obliged for preserving your lives, but as my own children, of the royal blood of the monarchs of Persia, whose glory I am persuaded you will maintain." After the 2 princes and princess had embraced mutually with new satisfaction, the Emperor sat down again with them and finished his meal in haste, and when he had done, said, "My children, you see in me your father. Tomorrow I will bring the queen your mother, therefore prepare to receive her." The Emperor afterwards mounted his horse and returned with expedition to his capital. The first thing he did, as soon as he had alighted and entered his palace, was to command the Grand Vizier to seize the queen's 2 sisters. They were taken from their houses separately, convicted and condemned to be quartered, which sentence was put in execution within an hour. In the meantime, the Emperor Khusru Shah, followed by all the lords of his court who were then present, went on foot to the door of the great mosque, and after he had taken the queen out of the strict confinement she had languished under for so many years, embracing her in the miserable condition to which she was then reduced, said to her with tears in his eyes, "I come to entreat your pardon for the injustice I have done you, and to make you the reparation I ought, which I have begun by punishing the unnatural wretches who put the abominable cheat upon me, and I hope you will look upon it as complete, when I present to you 2 accomplished princes and a lovely princess, our children. Come and resume your former rank, with all the honors which you are due." All this was done and said before great crowds of people who flocked from all parts at the first news of what was passing, and immediately spread the joyful intelligence through the city. Next morning early, the Emperor and the Queen, whose mournful, humiliating dress was changed for magnificent robes, went with all their court to the house built by the intendant of the gardens, where the Emperor presented the princes Bahman and Perviz and the princess Scheherazade to their enraptured mother. "These, much injured wife," said he, "are the 2 princes your sons, and this princess your daughter. Embrace them with the same tenderness I have done, since they are worthy both of me and you." The tears flowed plentifully down their cheeks at these tender embraces, especially the queen's, from the comfort and joy of having 2 such princes for her sons, and such a princess for her daughter, on whose account she had so long endured the severest afflictions. The 2 princes and the princess had prepared a magnificent repast for the Emperor and Queen and their court. As soon as that was over, the Emperor led the Queen into the garden, and showed her the harmonious tree and the beautiful effect of the yellow fountain. She had seen the bird in his cage, and the Emperor had spared no panegyric in his praise during the repast. When there was nothing to detain the Emperor any longer, he took horse, and with the Princes Bahman and Perviz on his right hand, and the Queen Consort and the Princess at his left, preceded and followed by all the officers of his court, according to their rank, returned to his capital. Crowds of people came out to meet them, and with acclamations of joy ushered them into the city, where all eyes were fixed not only upon the Queen, the 2 princes, and the princess, but also upon the bird, which the princess carried before her in his cage, admiring his sweet notes, which had drawn all the other birds about him, which followed him, flying from tree to tree in the country, and from one housetop to another in the city. The Princes Bahman and Perviz and the Princess Scheherazade were at length brought to the palace with this pomp, and nothing was to be seen or heard all that night but illuminations and rejoicings both in the palace and in the utmost parts of the city, which lasted many days and were continued throughout the Empire of Persia, as intelligence of the joyful event reached the several provinces. End of Section 12. Recording by Beth Blakely.
Vol.4, translated by Jonathan Scott. The story of the Sultan of Yemen and his 3 sons. There was in the land of Yemen, Arabia Felix, a sultan, under whom were 3 tributary princes. He had 4 children, 3 sons and a daughter. He possessed greater treasures than could be estimated, as well as innumerable camels, horses, and flocks of sheep, and was held in awe by all contemporary sovereigns. After a long and prosperous reign, age brought with it infirmity, and he at length became incapable of appearing in his hall of audience, upon which he commanded his sons to his presence, and said to them, "My wish is to divide among you, before my death, all my possessions, that you may be satisfied, and live in unanimity and brotherly affection with each other, and in obedience to my dying commands." They exclaimed, "To hear is to obey." The Sultan then said, "My will is that the eldest be sovereign in my room, that the second possess my treasures, and the third every description of animals. Let no one encroach upon another, but all assist each other." He then caused them to sign an agreement to abide by his bequests, and shortly afterwards was received into the mercy of the Almighty. Upon which his sons prepared what was suitable to his dignity for his funeral. They washed the corpse, enshrouded it, prayed over it, and having committed it to the earth, returned to their palaces, where the viziers, officers of state, and inhabitants of the metropolis, high and low, rich and poor, attended to console with them on the loss of their father. The news of the death of the Sultan was soon spread abroad in all the provinces, and deputations from every city came to condole with the princess. After their ceremonies, the eldest prince demanded that he should be inaugurated Sultan in the room of the deceased monarch, agreeably to his will. But this was not possible, as each of the other brothers was ambitious of being sovereign. Contention and disputes arose between them for the government, till at length the elder brother, wishing to avoid civil war, said, "Let us go and submit to the arbitration of one of the tributary sultans, and to let him whom he adjudes the kingdom peaceably enjoy it." To this they assented, as did also the viziers, and they departed, unattended, towards the capital of one of the tributary sultans. When the princes had proceeded about halfway on their journey, they reached a verdant spot, abounding in herbage and flowers, with a clear rivulet running through it, the convenience of which made them halt to refresh themselves. They sat down and were eating, when one of the brothers, casting his eyes on the grass, said, "A camel has lately passed this way loaded, half with sweetmeats and half with grain." "True," cried another, "and he was blind of one eye." "Yes," exclaimed the third, "and he had lost his tail." They had scarcely concluded their remarks when the owner of the camel came up to them, for he had heard what they had said, and was convinced, as they had described the beast and his load, that they must have stopped him, crying out that they had stolen his camel. "We have not seen him," answered the princess, "nor touched him." "By Allah," replied he, "none but you can have taken him, and if you will not deliver him up, I will complain of you to the Sultan." They rejoined, "It is well, let us go to the Sultan." When all four had reached the palace, information was given of the arrival of the princes, and they were admitted to an audience, the owner of the camel following, who bawled out, "These men, my lord, by their own confession, have stolen my property, for they described him and the load he carried." The man then related what each of the princes had said, upon which the Sultan demanded if it was true. They answered, "My lord, we have not seen the camel, but we chanced, as we were sitting on the grass taking some refreshment, to observe that part of the pasture had been grazed, upon which we supposed that the camel must have been blind of an eye, as the grass was only eaten on one side. We then observed the dung of a camel in one heap on the ground, which made us agree that its tail must have been cut off, as it is the custom for camels to shake their tails and scatter it abroad. On the grass where the camel had lain down, we saw on one side flies collected in great numbers, but none on the other. This made us conclude that one of the panniers must have contained sweets, and the other only grain. Upon hearing the above, The Sultan said to the complainant, "Friend, go and look for thy camel, for these observations do not prove the theft on the accused, but only the strength of their understandings and penetration." The Sultan now ordered apartments for the princes, and directed that they should be entertained in a manner befitting their rank, after which he left them to their repose. In the evening, when the usual meal was brought in, the elder prince, having taken up a cake of bread, said, "This bread, I am sure, was made by a sick woman." The second, on tasting some kid, exclaimed, "This kid was suckled by a bitch." And the third cried out, "Certainly the Sultan must be illegitimate." At this instant the Sultan, who had been listening, entered hastily and exclaimed, "Wherefore utter ye these affronting speeches?" "Inquire," replied the princes, "into what you have heard, and you will find all true." The Sultan now retired to his harem, and on inquiry found that the woman who had kneaded the bread was sick. He then sent for the shepherd, who owned that the dam of the kid having died, he had suckled it upon a bitch. Next, in a violent passion, he proceeded to the apartments of the Sultana mother, and, brandishing his scimitar, threatened her with death, unless she confessed whether he was the son of the late Sultan or not. The Sultana was alarmed, and said, "To preserve my life, I must speak truth. Know then that thou art the son of a cook. Thy father had no male offspring, at which he was uneasy. On the same day myself and the wife of the cook lay in, I of a daughter and she of a son. I was fearful of the coolness of the Sultan, and imposed upon him the son of the cook for his own. That son art thou, who now enjoyest an empire." The spurious Sultan left the Sultana in astonishment at the penetration of the brothers, whom he summoned to his presence, and inquired of them on what grounds they had founded their just suspicions respecting the bread, the kid, and himself. "My lord," replied the elder prince, "when I broke the cake, the flour fell out in lumps, and hence I guessed that she who made it had not strength to knead it sufficiently, and must have been unwell." "It is as thou hast said," replied the Sultan. "The fat of the kid," continued the second brother, "was all next the bone, and the flesh of every other animal but the dog has it next the skin. Hence my surmise that it must have been suckled by a bitch." "Thou wert right," answered the Sultan. "But now for myself." "My reason for supposing thee illegitimate," said the youngest prince, "was, because thou didst not associate with us, who are of the same rank with thyself. Every man has properties which he inherits from his father, his grandfather, or his mother. From his father, generosity or avarice; from his grandfather, valor or cowardice; from his mother, bashfulness or impudence." "Thou hast spoken justly," replied the Sultan. "But why come ye to ask judgment of me, since ye are so much better able to decide difficult questions than myself? Return home and agree among yourselves." The princes did so, and obeyed the will of their father. End of section number 13. Translated by Jonathan Scott. Story of the Three Sharpers and the Sultan. Three very ingenious sharpers who associated together, being much distressed, agreed, in hopes of obtaining immediate relief, that they would go to the Sultan and pretend each to superior ability in some occupation. Accordingly, they proceeded to the metropolis, but found admission to the presence difficult, the Sultan being at a garden palace surrounded by guards, who would not let them approach. Upon this they consulted, and agreed to feign a quarrel, in hopes that their clamour would draw the notice of the Sultan. It did so. He commanded them to be brought before him, inquired who they were, and the cause of the dispute. "We were disputing," said they, "concerning the superiority of our professions, for each of us possesses complete skill in his own." "What are your professions?" replied the Sultan. "I am," said one, "O sovereign, a lapidary of wonderful skill." "I fear thou art an astonishing rascal," exclaimed the Sultan. "I am," said the second sharper, a genealogist of horses, and I, continued the third, a genealogist of mankind, knowing everyone's true descent, an art much more wonderful than that of either of my companions, for no one possesses it but myself, nor ever did before me. The Sultan was astonished, but gave little credit to their pretensions. Yet he said to himself, "If these men speak truth, they are worthy of encouragement. I will keep them near me till I have occasion to try them. When, if they prove their abilities, I will promote them, but if not, I will put them to death." He then allotted them an apartment, with an allowance of 3 cakes of bread and a mess of pottage daily, but placed spies over them, fearing lest they might escape. Not long after this, a present of rarities was brought to the Sultan, among which were 2 precious stones, one of them remarkably clear in its water, and the other with a flaw. The Sultan now bethought himself of the lapidary, and sent for him to his presence, when he gave him the clear jewel to examine, and demanded what he thought it was worth. The sharper took the stone, and with much gravity turned it backwards and forwards in his hands, examining it with minute attention on every part, after which he said, "My lord, this jewel has a flaw in the very centre of it." When the Sultan heard this, he was enraged against the sharper, and gave orders to strike off his head, saying, "This stone is free from blemish, and yet thou pretends it hath a flaw." The executioner now advanced, laid hold of the sharper, bound him, and was going to strike, when the Vizier entered, and, seeing the Sultan enraged, and the sharper under the cimeter, inquired the cause. Being informed, he advanced towards the Sultan and said, "My lord, act not thus, but first break the stone. Should a flaw appear in it, the words of this man are true, but if it be found free from blemish, put him to death." The Sultan replied, "Thy advice is just," and broke it in 2 with his mace. In the middle he found a flaw, at which he was astonished, and exclaimed to the sharper, "By what means couldst thou discover the blemish?" He replied, "By the acuteness of my sight." The Sultan then released him and said, "Take him back to his companions, allow him a mess of pottage to himself, and 2 cakes of bread." Some time after this, a tribute came from one of the provinces, part of which consisted of a beautiful black colt, in colour resembling the hue of the darkest night. The Sultan was delighted with the animal, and spent whole days in admiring him. At length he bethought himself of the sharper, who had pretended to be a genealogist of horses, and commanded him to his presence. When he appeared, the Sultan said, "Art thou a judge of horses?" He replied, "Yes, my lord." Upon which the Sultan exclaimed, "It is well, but I swear by him who appointed me guardian of his subjects, and said to the universe, 'Be and it was, that should I find untruth in thy declaration, I will strike off thy head.'" The man replied, "To hear is to submit." After this they brought out the colt, that he might examine him. The sharper desired the groom to mount the colt and pace him before him, which he did backwards and forwards, the fiery animal all the while plunging and rearing. At length the genealogist said, "It is enough," and turning to the Sultan exclaimed, "My lord, this colt is singularly beautiful, of true blood by his sire. His pace is exquisite and proportions just, but in him there is one blemish. Could that be done away, he would be all perfection, nor would there be upon the face of the earth his equal among all the various breeds of horses." "What can that blemish be?" said the Sultan. "His sire," rejoined the genealogist, "was of true blood, but his dam of another species of animal, and if commanded, I will inform you." "Speak," said the Sultan. "The dam of this beautiful colt," continued the genealogist, "was a buffalo." When the Sultan heard this, he flew into a rage, and commanded an executioner to strike off the head of the sharper, exclaiming, "Thou accursed dog, how could a buffalo bring forth a colt?" "My lord," replied the sharper, "the executioner is in attendance, but send for the person who presented the colt, and inquire of him the truth. If my words prove just, my skill will be ascertained, but if what I have said be false, then let my head pay the forfeit for my tongue." Upon this the Sultan sent for the master of the colt to attend his presence. When the master of the colt appeared before him, the Sultan inquired whether it was purchased of another person or had been bred by himself, to which the man replied, "My lord, I will relate nothing but the truth. The production of this colt is surprising. His sire belonged to me and was of the true breed of sea horses, but he was always kept in an enclosure by himself, as I was fearful of his being injured. But it happened one day in the spring that the groom took him for air into the country and piqueted him in the plain. By chance, a cow buffalo coming near the spot, the stallion became outrageous, broke his heel ropes, joined the buffalo, which after the usual period of gestation produced this colt, to our great astonishment." The Sultan was surprised at this relation. He commanded the genealogist to be sent for, and upon his arrival said, "Thy words have proved true, and thy wonderful skill in the breed of horses is ascertained. But by what mark couldst thou know that the dam of this colt was a buffalo?" The man replied, "My lord, the mark is visible in the colt itself. It is not unknown to any person of observation that the hoof of a horse is nearly round, but the hoof of a buffalo thick and longish, like this colt's. Hence I judged that the dam must certainly have been a buffalo." The Sultan now dismissed him graciously and commanded that he should be allowed daily a mess of pottage and 2 cakes of bread. Not long after this, the Sultan bethought himself of the third sharper, who pretended that he was the genealogist of man, and sent for him to the presence. On his appearance, he said, "Thou canst trace the descent of man." "Yes, my lord," replied the genealogist. Upon this, the Sultan commanded an eunuch to take him into his harem, that he might examine the descent of his favorite mistress. Upon his introduction, he looked at the lady on this side and on that, through her veil, till he was satisfied, when he came out, and the Sultan exclaimed, "Well, what hast thou discovered in my mistress?" He replied, "My lord, she is all perfect in elegance, beauty, grace, stature, bloom, modesty, accomplishments, and knowledge, so that everything desirable centers in herself. But still there is one point that disgraces her, from which, if she was free, it is not possible she could be excelled in anything among the whole of the fair sex." When the Sultan had heard this, he rose up angrily, and drawing his scimitar, ran toward the genealogist, intending to strike off his head. Just as he was going to strike, some of the attendants said, "My lord, put not the man to death before thou art convinced of his falsehood." Upon which the Sultan exclaimed, "What fault appeared to thee in my mistress?" "O Sultan," replied the man, "she is, as to herself, all perfect, but her mother was a rope dancer." Upon this the Sultan immediately sent for the father of the lady and said, "Inform me truly who was the mother of thy daughter, or I will put thee to death." "Mighty prince," replied the father, "there is no safety for man but in the truth. Her mother was a rope dancer, whom I took when very young from a company of strolling mummers, and educated. She grew up most beautiful and accomplished. I married her, and she produced me the girl whom thou hast chosen." When the Sultan heard this, his rage cooled, but he was filled with astonishment, and said to the genealogist, "Inform me what could shew thee that my mistress was the daughter of a rope dancer?" "My lord," replied the man, "this caste of people have always their eyes very black, and their eyebrows bushy. Such are hers, and from them I guessed her descent." The Sultan was now convinced of his skill, dismissed him graciously, and commanded that he should be allowed a mess of pottage and 3 cakes of bread daily, which was done accordingly. Some time after this, the Sultan reflected on the 3 sharpers, and said to himself, "These men have proved their skill in whatever I have tried them. The lapidary was singularly excellent in his art, the horse genealogist in his, and the last has proved his upon my mistress. I have an inclination to know my own descent beyond a doubt." He then ordered the genealogist into his presence and said, "Dost thou think thou canst prove my descent?" "Yes, my lord," replied the man, "but on condition that you spare my life after I shall have informed you, for the proverb says, When the Sultan is present, beware of his anger, as there is no delay when he commands to strike. There shall be safety for thee, exclaimed the Sultan, in my promise, an obligation that can never be forfeited. O Sultan, continued the genealogist, when I shall inform thee of thy parentage and descent, let not there be any presence who may hear me. Wherefore, replied the Sultan. My lord, answered the sharper, you know the attributes of the deity should be veiled in mystery. The Sultan now commanded all his attendants to retire, and when they were alone, the genealogist advanced and said, Mighty prince, thou art illegitimate, and the son of an adulteress. As soon as the Sultan heard this, his colour changed, he turned pale, and fainted away. When he was recovered, he remained some time in deep contemplation, after which he exclaimed, By him who constituted me the guardian of his people, I swear that if thy assertion be found true, I will abdicate my kingdom and resign it to thee, for royalty cannot longer become me. But should thy words prove void of foundation, I will put thee to instant death. To hear is to assent, replied the sharper. The Sultan now arose, entered the harem, and bursting into his mother's apartment with his scimitar drawn, exclaimed, By him who divided the heavens from the earth, shouldst thou not answer faithfully to what I shall inquire, I will cut thee to pieces with this scimitar. The queen, trembling with alarm, said, What dost thou ask of me? Inform me, replied the Sultan, of whom am I the son? Since truth only can save me, cried the princess. Know that thou art the offspring of a cook. My husband had no children either male or female, on which account he became sad and lost his health and appetite. In the court of the harem we had several sorts of birds, and one day the Sultan, fancying he should relish one of them, ordered the cook to kill and dress it. I happened then to be in the bath alone. As I was in the bath, continued the Sultana, I saw the cook endeavouring to catch the birds. At that instant it occurred to my mind from the instigation of Satan that if I bore not a son after the death of the Sultan, my influence would be lost. I tempted the man, and thou art the produce of my crime. The signs of my pregnancy soon appeared, and when the Sultan was informed of them, he recovered his health, and rejoiced exceedingly, and conferred favours and presents on his ministers and courtiers daily, till the time of my delivery. On that day he chanced to be upon a hunting excursion at a country palace, but when intelligence was brought him of the birth of a son, he instantly returned to me, and issued orders for the city to be decorated, which was done for 40 days together, out of respect to the Sultan. Such was my crime, and such was thy birth. The Sultan now returned to the adventurer, and commanded him to pull off his clothes, which he did, when the Sultan, disrobing himself, habitated him in the royal vestment, after which he said, Inform me whence thou judgest that I was a bastard. My lord, replied the adventurer, when each of us shewed our skill in what was demanded, you ordered him only an allowance of a mess of pottage and 3 cakes of bread. Hence I judged you to be the offspring of a cook, for it is the custom of princes to reward the deserving with wealth and honours, but you only gratified us with victuals from your kitchen. The Sultan replied, Thou hast spoken truly. He then made him put on the rest of the royal robes and ornaments, and seated him upon the throne, after which he disguised himself in the habit of a dervish, and wandered from his abdicated dominions. When the lucky adventurer found himself in possession of the throne, he sent for his companions, and finding they did not recognize him in his royal habiliments, dismissed them with liberal presents, but commanded them to quit his territories with the utmost expedition, lest they should discover him. After this, with a satisfied mind, he fulfilled the duties of his new station with a liberality and dignity that made the inhabitants of the metropolis and all the provinces bless him and pray for the prolongation of his reign. End of section number 14. Translated by Jonathan Scott. Story of the Three Sharpers and the Sultan. The Adventures of the Abdicated Sultan. The abdicated prince, disguised as a dervish, did not cease travelling in a solitary mood till he came to the city of Cairo, which he perceived to be in repose and security, and well regulated. Here he amused himself with walking through several streets, till he had reached the royal palace, and was admiring its magnificent architecture and extent, and the crowds passing in and out, when the Sultan with his train appeared in sight, returning from a hunting excursion, upon which he retired to one side of the road. The Sultan, observing his dignified demeanour, commanded one of his attendants to invite him to the palace, and entertain him till he should inquire after him. When the Sultan had reposed himself from the fatigue of his exercise, he sent for the supposed dervish to his presence, and said, "From what kingdom art thou arrived?" He answered, "I am, my lord, a wandering dervish." "Well," replied the Sultan, "but inform me on what account thou art come here." On which he said, "My lord, this cannot be done but in privacy." "Let it be so," rejoined the Sultan, and rising up, led him into a retired apartment of the palace. That supposed dervish then related what had befallen him, the cause of his having abdicated his kingdom, and taken upon himself the character of a religious. The Sultan was astonished at his self-denial, and exclaimed, "Blessed be his holy name, who exalteth and humbleth whom he will by his almighty power. But my history is more surprising than thine. I will relate it to thee, and conceal nothing." End of section number 15.
Entertainments, Vol.4, translated by Jonathan Scott. Section 16, The Story of the Three Sharpers and the Sultan. History of Muhammad, Sultan of Cairo. At my first outset in the world, I was an indigent man, and possessed none of the conveniences of life, till at length I became possessed of 10 pieces of silver, which I resolved to expend in amusing myself. With this intention, I walked one day into the principal market, intending first to purchase somewhat delicate to feast upon. While I was looking about me, a man passed by with a great crowd following and laughing at him, for he led in an iron chain a monstrous baboon, which he cried for sale at the price of 10 pieces of silver. Something instinctively impelled me to purchase the creature, so I paid him the money, and took my bargain to my lodging, but on my arrival was at a loss how to produce a meal for myself or the baboon. While I was considering what I should do, the baboon, having made several springs, became suddenly transformed into a handsome young man, beautiful as the moon at the 14th night of its appearance, and addressed me, saying, "Sheikh Mohammed, thou hast purchased me for 10 pieces of silver, being all thou hadst, and art now thinking how thou canst procure food for me and thyself." "That is true," replied I. "But in the name of Allah, from whence dost thou come?" "Ask no questions," replied my companion, "but take this piece of gold, and purchase us somewhat to eat and drink." I took the gold, and did as he desired, and we spent the evening merrily together in feasting and conversation, till it was time to repose. In the morning the young man said, "My friend, this lodging is not fitting for us. Go and hire a better." "To hear is to obey," replied I, and departed to the principal serai, where I hired an upper apartment, to which we removed. He then gave me 10 dinars, with orders to purchase carpets and cushions, which I did, and on my return found before him a package containing princely vestments. These he gave to me, desiring that I would go to a bath, and after bathing put them on. I obeyed his commands, dressed myself, and found in each pocket 100 dinars. I was not a little proud of my improved appearance in the rich robes. On my return, he praised my figure and seated me by him, when we refreshed ourselves and chatted on various subjects. At length he gave me a bundle, desiring that I would present it to the Sultan, and at the same time demand his daughter in marriage for myself, assuring me that my request would meet a ready compliance. The young man commanded a slave he had bought to attend me, who carried the bundle, and I set out for the palace, near which I found a great crowd of grandees, officers, and guards, who, seeing me so richly habited, inquired respectively what I wanted. Upon my replying that my business was with the Sultan, they informed the ushers, who introduced me to the presence. I made the customary obeisance, and the Sultan returned my salute, after which I presented the bundle before him, saying, "Will my lord accept this trifle, becoming my humble situation to offer, but certainly not worthy of the royal dignity to receive?" The Sultan commanded the package to be opened, when lo, it contained a complete dress of royal apparel, richer than had ever been before seen, at which the Sultan was astonished and exclaimed, "Heavens! I have nothing like this, nor ever possessed so magnificent a suit. It shall be accepted. But inform me, Sheikh, what thou requirest in return for so valuable an offering." "Mighty sovereign," replied I, "my wish is to become thy relation, by espousing that precious gem of the casket of beauty, thy incomparable daughter." When the Sultan had heard this request, he turned towards his vizier and said, "Advise me on how I should act in this affair." Upon which the minister replied, "Shew him, my lord, your most valuable diamond, and inquire if he has any one equally precious to match it, as a marriage present for your daughter." The Sultan did so, when I said, "If I present two, will you give me your daughter?" To which he assented, and I took my leave, carrying with me the diamond, to shew the young man as a model. Upon my arrival at our serai, I informed him of what passed, when he examined the diamond, and said, "The day is now far spent, but tomorrow I will procure 10 like it, which thou shalt present to the Sultan." Accordingly, in the morning he walked out, and in the space of an hour returned with 10 diamonds, which he gave me, and I hastened with them to the Sultan. When he beheld the precious stones, he was enraptured at their brilliancy, and again consulted his vizier how he should act in this business. "My lord," replied the minister, "you only required 1 diamond of the sheikh, and he has presented you with 10. It is, therefore, incumbent upon you to give him your daughter." The Sultan now sent for the qazis and the effendis, who drew up the deed of espousals, which they gave me when I returned to our serai, and showed it to the young man, who said, "It is well, go and complete thy marriage, but I entreat that thou wilt not consummate thy nuptials till I shall give thee permission." "To hear is to obey," replied I. When it was night, I entered the princess's apartment, and sat down at a distance from her, and did not speak till morning, when I bade her farewell, and took my leave for the day. I observed the same conduct the second night and the third, upon which, offended by my coldness, she complained to her mother, who informed the Sultan of my affronting behavior. The Sultan sent for me to his presence, and with much anger threatened, if I should continue my coldness to the princess another evening, that he would put me to death. Upon this I hastened to inform my friend at the serai, who commanded that when I should next be alone with my wife, I should demand of her a bracelet which she wore upon her right arm, and bring it to him, after which I might consummate my nuptials. I replied, "To hear is to obey," and the next evening, when I entered the apartment, said to my wife, "If thou desirest that we should live happily together, give me the bracelet on thy right arm." She did so immediately, when I carried it to the young man, and, returning to the palace, slept, as I supposed, with the princess till morning. Guess, however, what was my surprise, when on awaking I found myself lying in my first humble lodging, stripped of my rich vestments, and saw on the ground my former mean attire, namely an old vest and a pair of tattered drawers, and a ragged turban, as full of holes as a sieve. When I had somewhat recovered my senses, I put them on, and walked out in a melancholy mood, regretting my lost happiness, and not knowing what I should do to recover it. As I strolled toward the palace, I beheld sitting in the street a fortune-teller, who had some written papers before him, and was casting omens for the bystanders. I advanced, and made him a salute, which he returned kindly, and after looking attentively in my face, exclaimed, "What has that accursed wretch betrayed thee, and torn thee from thy wife?" I replied, "Yes." Upon this he desired me to wait a little, and seated me by him. When his employers were departed, he said, "My friend, The ape which you purchased for 10 pieces of silver, and who soon after was transformed into a young man, is not of human race, but a genie deeply in love with the princess whom you married. However, he could not approach her while she wore the bracelet, containing a powerful charm, upon her right arm, and therefore made use of thee to obtain it. He is now with her, but I will soon effect his destruction, that genii and men may be secure from his wickedness, for he is one of the rebellious and accursed spirits who disobeyed our Lord Solomon, son of David. After this, the fortune-teller wrote a note, which, having sealed and directed, he gave it to me, saying, "Go to a certain spot, wait there, and observe those who may approach. Fortify thy mind, and when thou shalt see a great personage attended by a numerous train, present to him this letter, when he will accomplish thy desires." I took the note, immediately departed for the place to which the fortune-teller had directed me, and after traveling all night and half the next day reached it, and sat down to wait for what might happen. The evening shut in, and about a fourth part of the night had passed, when a great glare of lights appeared advancing towards me from a distance, and as it shone nearer, I perceived persons carrying flambeaux and lanterns, also a numerous train of attendants, as if belonging to some mighty sultan. My mind was alarmed, but I recovered myself and resolved to stay where I was. A great concourse passed by me, marching two and two, and at length there appeared a sultan of the genii, surrounded by a splendid attendance, upon which I advanced as boldly as I could, and having prostrated myself, presented the letter, which he opened and read aloud as follows. "Be it known unto thee, O Sultan of the genii, that the bearer of this is in distress, from which thou must relieve him by destroying his enemy. Shouldest thou not assist him, beware of thy own safety. Farewell." When the Sultan of the genii had read the note, he called out to one of his messengers, who immediately attended before him, and commanded him to bring into his presence without delay the genie who had enchanted the daughter of the Sultan of Cairo. "To hear is to obey," replied the messenger, and instantly disappearing, was absent for about an hour, when he returned with the criminal and placed him before the Sultan of the genii, who exclaimed, "Accursed wretch, hast thou ill-treated this man?" "Mighty sovereign," replied the genie, "my crime proceeded from love of the princess, who wore a charm in her bracelet which prevented my approaching her, and therefore I made use of this man. He procured me the charm, and I now have her in my power, but I love her tenderly and have not injured her." "Return the bracelet instantly," replied the Sultan of the genii, "that the man may recover his wife, or I will command an executioner to strike off thy head." The offending genie, who was of an accursed and obstinate race, upon hearing these words was inflamed with passion, and insolently cried out, "I will not return the bracelet, for no one shall possess the princess but myself." Having said thus, he attempted to fly away, but in vain. The Sultan of the genii now commanded his attendants to bind the criminal in chains, which they did, and having forced the bracelet from him, struck off his head. The Sultan then presented me with the charm, which was no sooner in my hand than all the genii vanished from my sight, and I found myself dressed as before in the rich habit given me by the pretended young man. I proceeded to the city, which I entered, and when I came near the palace was recognized by the guards and courtiers, who cried out in raptures of joy, "Our lost prince is at length returned." They paid their respects, and I entered the apartment of the princess, whom I found in a deep sleep, in which state she had been ever since my departure. On my replacing the bracelet on her arm, she awoke. After this, we lived together in all happiness, till the death of her father, who appointed me his successor, having no son, so that I am what I am. When the Sultan of Cairo had finished his narrative, the abdicated prince expressed his surprise at his adventures, upon which the Sultan said, "Wonder not, my brother, at the dispensations of the Almighty, for he worketh in secret, and when he pleaseth, revealeth his mysteries. Since thou hast quitted thy kingdom, if thou choosest, thou shalt be my vizier, and we will live together as friends and brothers." "To hear is to obey," replied the prince. The sultan then constituted him vizier, enrobed him in a rich uniform, and committed to him his seal, the inkstand, and other insignia of office, at the same time conferring upon him a magnificent palace, superbly furnished with gorgeous carpets, musneds, and cushions. Belonging to it were also extensive gardens. The vizier entered immediately upon his new office, held his divans regularly twice every day, and judging so equitably on all appeals brought before him that his fame for justice and impartiality was soon spread abroad, insomuch that whoever had a cause or dispute willingly referred it to his decision, and was satisfied with it, praying for his life and prosperity. In this state he remained for many years, the sovereign pleased with him, and he happy under the protection of the Sultan of Cairo, so that he did not regret his abdicated kingdom. It happened one evening that the mind of the Sultan was depressed, upon which he sent for the vizier, who attended, when he said, "Vizier, my mind is so uneasy that nothing will amuse me." "Enter then," replied the minister, "into thy cabinet, and look at thy jewels, the examination of which may perhaps entertain thee." The Sultan did so, but it had no effect on his lassitude, when he said, "Vizier, this dispiritedness will not quit me, and nothing gives me pleasure within my palace. Let us, therefore, walk out in disguise." "To hear is to obey," replied the vizier. They then retired into a private chamber, and putting on the habits of dervishes of Arabia, strolled through the city till they reached a hospital for lunatics, which they entered. Here they beheld two men, one reading and the other listening to him, when the Sultan said to himself, "This is surprising," and addressed the men, saying, "Are you really mad?" They replied, "We are not mad, but our stories are so wonderful that were they recorded on a tablet of adamant, they would remain for examples to them who would be advised." "Let us hear them," said the Sultan, upon which the man who had been reading exclaimed, "Hear mine first," and thus began. End of section 16.
17. Story of the Three Sharpers and the Sultan. Story of the First Lunatic. I was a merchant, and had a warehouse in which were Indian goods of all sorts and of the highest value, and I bought and sold to great advantage. One day I was sitting in my warehouse, according to custom, busy in buying and selling. An old woman came in, telling her beads, and greeted me. I returned her salute, when she sat down and said, "Sir, have you any choice Indian clothes?" "Yes, my mistress," replied I, "of all sorts that you can possibly wish for." "Bring them," said she. I showed her a piece of great value, with which she was highly pleased, and inquired the price. 500 dinars, replied I. She took out her purse, paid me the money, and went away with the cloth, upon which I had a profit of 150 dinars. She returned the next day, bought another piece, paid for it, and in short did the same thing for 15 days successively, paying me regularly for each purchase. On the 16th day she came to my shop as usual, chose the cloth, and was going to pay me, but missed her purse. Upon which she said, "Sir, I have unfortunately left my purse at home." "Mistress," replied I, "it is of no consequence. Take this cloth, and if you return, well, if not, you are welcome to this trifle." She would not take it. I pressed her, but in vain. Much friendly argument passed between us, till at length she said, "Sir, you contradict, and I contradict, but we shall never agree unless you will favor me by accompanying me to my house to receive the value of your goods. So lock up your warehouse, lest anything should be lost in your absence." Accordingly, I fastened my doors, and accompanied her. We walked on conversing, till we came near her house, when she pulled out a handkerchief from her girdle, and said, "My desire is to cover this over thy eyes." "On what account?" replied I. "Because," said she, "in our way are several houses, the gates of which are open, and the women are sitting in their balconies, so that possibly thy eyes may glance upon some of them, and thy heart be distracted with love. For in this part are many beautiful damsels, who would fascinate even a religious, and therefore I am alarmed for thy peace." Upon this I said to myself, "This old woman advises me properly," and I consented to her demand. When she bound the handkerchief over my eyes, and we proceeded until we arrived at her house, she knocked at the door, which was opened by a damsel, and we entered. The old lady then took the handkerchief from my eyes, when I looked around me and perceived that I was in a mansion having several quadrangles, highly ornamented, and resembling the palaces of the Sultan. The old lady now desired me to retire into a room, which I did, and there beheld heaped together all the pieces of cloth which she had purchased for me, at which I was surprised, but still more so when two damsels, beautiful as the pleasant moons, approached, and having divided a piece of cloth into halves, each took one, and wrapped it round her hand. Then they sprinkled the floor with rose water and other scents, wiping it with the cloth, and rubbing it till it became bright as silver, after which they withdrew into an adjoining room, and brought out at least 50 stools, which they set down, and placed all over rich covering with cushions of tissue. Then they fetched a large stool of gold, and having put upon it a carpet of cushions and gold brocade, retired. Not long after this, there descended from the staircase by 2 and 2 as many damsels in number as the stools, upon each of which one sat down. At last descended a lady attended by 10 damsels, who placed herself upon the larger stool. When I beheld her, my lord, my senses forsook me. I was in raptures of her beauty, her stature, her elegance, as she chattered and laughed with her companions. At length she exclaimed, "My dear mother!" when the old woman entered, to whom she said, "Hast thou brought the young man?" She replied, "Yes, my daughter, he is ready to attend thee." Upon which the lady said, "Introduce him to me." When I heard this, I was alarmed, and said to myself, "There is no refugee but in the highmost God. Doubtless she has discovered my being here, and will command me to put to death." The old woman came to me, and leading me by the hand, took me before the lady seated upon the golden stool, who, on seeing me, smiled, made a graceful salute, and waved her hand for a seat to be brought, which was done, and placed close to her own. She then commanded me to sit down, which I did with much confusion. When I was seated, the lady began to chat and joke with me, saying, "What think of you, my appearance and my beauty? Do you judge me worthy of your affection? Shall I be your partner, and you mine?" When I heard these words, I replied, "How, dear lady, dare I presume, who am not worthy to be your servant, to arrive at such an honor?" Upon this she said, "Young man, my words have no evasion in them. Be not discouraged or fearful of returning me an answer, for my heart is devoted to thy love." I now perceived, my lord, that the lady was anxious to marry me, but could not conceive on what account, or who could have given her intelligence concerning me. She continued to show me many pleasing attentions, that at length I was emboldened to say, "Lady, if your words to me are insincere, according to the proverbs, no time is favorable as the present, there cannot," said she, "be a more fortunate day than this for our union." Upon this I replied, "My dear lady, how can I allot for your proper dowry?" "The value of the cloth you entrusted the old lady who is my mother," answered she, "is sufficient." "That cannot be enough," rejoined I. "Nothing more shall be added," exclaimed the lady. "My intention is this instant to send for the Kazi and witnesses. I will choose a trustee, that they may unite us without delay. We will celebrate our nuptials this very evening, but upon one condition." "What is that?" replied I. She answered, "That you bind yourself not to address or hold conversation with any woman but myself." My lord, I was eager to be in possession of such a beautiful woman, and therefore said to her, "I agree, and will never contradict thee either by my words or by actions." She then sent for the Kazi and witnesses, appointed a trustee, after which we were married. After the ceremony, she ordered coffee and sorbet, gave money to the Kazi, a dress of honor to her trustee, and we departed. I was lost in astonishment, and said to myself, "Do I dream or am I awake?" She now commanded her damsels to empty the warm bath, fill it afresh, and prepare cloths and necessaries for bathing. When they had done as she desired, she ordered the eunuchs in waiting to conduct me to the human, and gave them a rich dress. They led me into an elegant apartment, difficult for speech to describe. They spread many-colored carpets, upon which I sat down and undressed, after which I entered the human, and perceived delightful odors from sandalwood, of cornmeal, and other sweets diffusing from every part. Here they seated me, covered me with perfumed soaps, and rubbed me till my body became bright as silver, when they brought the basins, and I washed with warm water, after which they gave me rose water, and I poured it all over me. They next brought in sweet-smelling salves, which I rubbed all over me, and then prepared to the eunuman, where I found a royal dress, in which the eunuchs arrayed me, and after perfuming me with incense of sandalwood, brought in confections, coffee, and sherbets of various sorts, with which I refreshed myself. I then left the bath with my attendants, who showed me into the grand hall of the palace, which was spread with most magnificent carpets, stools, and cushions. Here the lady met me, attired in a new habit, more sumptuous than I had ever seen her in before. When I beheld my bride, she appeared to me, from the riches of her ornaments, like a concealed treasure from which the talisman had been removed. She sat down by me and smiled so fascinating upon me, I could no longer contain my rapture. In a short time she retired, but soon returned again in a dress richer than her last. I again embraced her, and in short, my lord, we remained together for 10 days in the height of happiness and enjoyment. At the end of this period, I recollected my mother, and said to my wife, "It is so long since I have been absent from home, and since my mother has not seen me, that I am certain she must be anxious concerning me. Will you permit me to visit her and look after my warehouse?" "There can be no impediment," replied she. "You may visit your mother daily, and employ yourself in your warehouse, but the old woman must conduct you and bring you back," to which I assented. The old lady then came in, tied a handkerchief over my eyes, conducted me to the spot where she had first blindfolded me, and said, "You shall return here about the time of the evening prayer, and will find me waiting." I left her, and repaired to my mother, whom I found in great affliction at my absence, weeping bitterly. Upon seeing me, she ran and embraced me with tears of joy. I said, "Weep not, my dear mother, for my absence has been owing to the highest of good fortune." I then informed her of my lucky adventure, when she exclaimed, "May Allah protect thee, my son, but visit me at least every 2 days, that my affection for thee may be gratified." I then went to my warehouse, and employed myself as usual till evening, when I returned to the place anointed, where I found the old lady, who blindfolded me as before, and conducted me to the palace of my wife, who received me with fondness. For 3 months I continued to go in this manner, but I could not help wishing to know whom I married, and wondering at the affluence, splendor, and attendance that appeared around her. At length I found an opportunity of being in private with one of her black slaves, and questioned her concerning her mistress. "My lord," replied she, "the history of my mistress is wonderful, but I dare not relate to it, lest she should put me to death." Upon this I assured her that if she would inform me, no one should know it but myself, and I took an oath of secrecy, when she began as follows. "My mistress one day went to a public bath, intending to amuse herself, for which purpose she made such preparations of delicacies and rarities as were worth a camel's load of treasure, and when she left the hammam, made an excursion to a garden where a splendid collation was laid out. Here she continued enjoying herself till evening, when she ordered her routine to make ready for departure, and the fragments of the entertainment to be distributed among the poor. On her return she passed through the street in which was your warehouse. It was upon a Friday, when you were sitting in conversation with a friend, arrayed in your best attire. She beheld you. Her heart was stricken with love, but no one perceived her emotion. However, she had no sooner reached her palace than she became low and melancholy, and her appetite failed her. At length she took to her bed, her color left her, sleep forsake her, and she became very weak. Upon this her mother went out to a physician, that he may consider what might be the cause of her daughter's indisposition. But on the way she met a skilful old lady, with whom she returned home. The old lady, on feeling the pulse of her patient, and after asking several questions, could perceive in her no bodily ailment or pain, upon which she judged she was in love, did not venture to speak to her before her mother of her suspicions. She took leave, and said, "By God's blessing thou wilt soon recover. I will return tomorrow, and bring with me an infallible medicine." She then took her mother aside, and said, "My good lady, be not angry at what I shall remark, but thy daughter has no bodily disorder. She is in love, and there can be no cure for her by a union with her beloved." The mother, on the departure of the old lady, repaired to her daughter, and with much difficulty, after 20 days of denial, for my mistress' modesty was hurt, obtained from her a description of your person, and the street in which you lived, upon which she behaved to you in the manner you are well acquainted with, brought you here, and you know what followed. Such is her story, concluded the black slave. "Which you must not reveal." "I will not," replied I. And after this I continued to live very happily with my wife, going daily to see my mother, to attend in my warehouse, and return in the evening, conducted as usual by the old lady, my mother-in-law. One day, after the expiration of some months, I was sitting in my warehouse. A damsel came into the street with the image of a cock composed in jewelry. It was set with pearls, diamonds, and other precious stones, and she offered it to the merchants for sale. When they began bidding for it at 500 deniers, and went to 950, all which I observed in silence, it did not interfere by speaking or bidding. At length a damsel came up to me and said, "My lord, all merchants have increased in bidding for my precious toy, but you have neither bidden nor taken any notice of me." "I have no occasion for it," replied I. "Nay," exclaimed she, "but you must bid something more." "Since I must," I answered, "I will give you 50 deniers more, which will be just 1,000. She accepted my price, and I went into my warehouse to fetch the money to pay her, saying to myself, I will present this to a curiosity as my wife, as it may please her. When I was going to pay the money, the damsel would not take it, but said, "My lord, I have a request to make, which is, that I may snatch one kiss from your cheek as the price of my jewelry, for I want nothing else." Upon this, I thought to myself, a single kiss of my cheek is an easy price for the value of 1,000 deniers, and consented, when she came up to me and gave me a kiss, but at the same time the most severe bite, left the piece of jewelry, and went away with the greatest haste. In the evening I repaired to the house of my wife, and found the old lady awaiting as usual at the accustomed spot. She tied the handkerchief over my eyes, and she had conducted me home, took it off. I found my wife sitting upon her golden stool, but dressed in scarlet and with an angry countenance. Upon which I said to myself, God grant all may be well. I approached her, took out the toy set with diamonds and rubies, thinking that on sight of it her ill humor would vanish, and said, "My mistress, accept this, for it is curious, and I have purchased it for thee." She took it in her hand and examined it on all sides, after which she exclaimed, "Dost thou really purchase this on my account?" "By heavens," replied I bought it for thy sake, for 1,000 deniers. Upon this she frowned angrily at me, and exclaimed, "What means that wound upon thy cheek?" I was overwhelmed with confusion. While I was in this state, she called out to her attendants, who immediately descended the staircase, carrying the headless corpse of a young girl, the head placed upon the middle of the body. I looked, and knew it to be the head of the damsel who had sold me the piece of jewelry for a kiss and had bitten my cheek. My wife now exclaimed, "I have no occasion for such babbles, for I have many of them. But I wish to know if thou went so faithful to thy agreement with me as to not address another woman than myself, and sent the girl to try thee. Since thy promise has been broken, begone and return no more." When my wife had finished her speech, the old woman took me by the hand, tied the handkerchief over my eyes, and conducted me to the usual spot, when she said, "Begone!" and disappeared. I was so overcome by the sad adventure and the loss of my wife that I ran through the streets like one frantic, crying, "Ah, what beauty, what grace, what elegance does she possess!" Upon which the people, supposing me distracted, conducted me to this hospital, and bound me in fetters, as you see. When the Sultan had heard the young man's story, when he, much affected, inclined his head for some instants in deep thought, and then said this to his vizier, "By Allah, who has entrusted me with sovereignty, if thou dost not discover the lady who married this young man, thy head shall be forfeited." The vizier was alarmed, but recovering himself, replied, "Allow me 3 days to search," to which the Sultan consented. The vizier then took with him the young man, and for 2 days was at loss on how to find the house. At length he inquired if he should know the spot where the handkerchief was tied over his eyes, and the gateway at which it was taken off, of which the youth professed to be certain. He conducted the minister to the street where he was blindfolded, and they reached a gateway, at which the vizier knocked. It was opened by the domestics, who, knowing the vizier and seeing the young man with him, were alarmed, and ran to communicate the quality of the visitants to her mistress. She desired to know the commands of the vizier, who informed her that it was the Sultan's pleasure that she should be reconciled with her husband, to which she replied, "Since the Sultan hath commanded, my duty is obedience." The young man was reunited with his wife, who was the daughter of the former Sultan of Cairo. Such were the adventures of the young man who was reading in the hospital. We now recite those of the youth who was listening to him. Upon the Sultan's inquiring his story, he begins as follows. End of section 17.
Jonathan Scott. Section 18. Story of the Three Sharpers and the Sultan. The Story of the Second Lunatic. My lord, I was by profession a merchant, and on my commencing business the youngest of my trade, having been just entered my 16th year. As I was one day busy in my warehouse, a damsel entering, put into my hands a packet, which on opening I found to contain several copies of verses in praise of myself, with a letter expressive of ardent affection for my person. Supposing them meant only as banter, I foolishly flew into a passion, seized the bearer, and beat her severely. On her departure, I reflected on my improper behavior, dreaded lest she should complain to her relations, and that they might revenge themselves upon me by some sudden assault. I repented of what I had done, but alas! It was when repentance would not avail. 10 days had passed, when as I was sitting in my warehouse as usual, a young lady entered most superbly dressed and odoriferously perfumed. She resembled in brightness the moon on its 14th night, so that when I gazed upon her, my senses forsook me, and I was incapable of attention to anything but herself. She addressed me, saying, "Young man, have you in your warehouse any female ornaments?" To which I replied, "Of all sorts, my lady, that you can possibly require." Upon this she desired to see some bracelets for the ankles, which I showed her, when holding out her foot she desired me to try them on. I did so. After this she asked for a necklace, and opening her veil, made me tie it on. She then chose a pair of bracelets, and extending her hands, desired me to put them on her wrists, which I did, after which she inquired the amount of the whole, when I exclaimed, "Fair lady, accept them as a present, and inform me whose daughter thou art." She replied, "I am the daughter of the chief magistrate." When I said, "My wish is to demand thee in marriage of thy father," she consented that I should, but observed, "When you ask me of my father, he will say, I have only one daughter, who is a cripple and wretchedly deformed. Do thou, however, reply that thou art willing to accept her, and if he remonstrates, still insist upon wedding her." I then asked when I should make my proposals. She replied, "The best time to visit my father is on the Eid al-Korban, which is 3 days hence, as thou will then find with him all his relations and friends, and our espousals will add to his festivity." Agreeably to the lady's instructions, on the 3rd day following I repaired with several of my friends to the house of the chief magistrate, and found him sitting in state, receiving the compliments of the day from the chief inhabitants of the city. We made our obeisance, which he graciously noticed, received us with kindness, and entered familiarly into conversation. A collation was brought in, the cloth spread, and we partook with him of the viands, after which we drank coffee. I then stood up, saying, "My lord, I am desirous of espousing the chaste lady your daughter, more precious than the richest gem." When the chief magistrate heard my speech, he inclined his head for some time towards the earth in deep thought, after which he said, "Son, my daughter is an unfortunate cripple, miserably deformed." To this replied, "To have her for my wife is all I wish." The magistrate then said, "If thou wilt have a wife of this description, it must be on condition that she shall not be taken from my house, that thou shalt consummate the marriage here and abide with me." I replied, "To hear is to obey," believing that she was the beautiful damsel who had visited my warehouse and whose charms I had so rapturously beheld. In short, the nuptial ceremony was performed, when I said to myself, "Heavens, is it possible that I am become master of this beautiful damsel, and shall possess her charms?" When night set in, the domestics of the chief magistrate introduced me into the chamber of my bride. I ran eagerly to gaze upon her beauty, but guess my mortification when I beheld her a wretched dwarf, a cripple, and deformed, as her father had represented. I was overcome with horror at the sight of her, distracted with disappointment, and ashamed of my own foolish credulity, but I dared not complain, as I had voluntarily accepted her as my wife from the magistrate. I sat down silently in one corner of the chamber, and she in another, for I could not bring myself to approach her, as she was disgusting to the sight of man, and my soul could not endure her company. At daybreak, I left the house of my father-in-law, repaired to my warehouse, which I opened, and sat down much distressed in mind, with my head dizzy, like one suffering from intoxication, when lo! Who should appear before me but the lady who had put upon me so mortifying a trick? She entered and paid me the customary salute. I was enraged, and began to abuse her, saying, "Wherefore hast thou put upon me such a stratagem?" When she replied, "Wretch, recollect the day that I brought thee a packet, in return for which you seized, beat, reviled, and drove me scornfully away. In retaliation for such treatment, I have taken revenge by giving thee such a delectable bride." I now fell at her feet, entreated her forgiveness, and expressed my repentance, upon which, smiling upon me, she said, "Be not uneasy, For as I have plunged thee into a dilemma, I will also relieve thee from it. Go to the Aga of the leather dressers, give him a sum of money, and desire him to call thee his son. Then repair with him, attended by his followers and musicians, to the house of the chief magistrate. When he inquires the cause of their coming, let the Aga say, My lord, we are come to congratulate thy son-in-law, who is my beloved child, on his marriage with thy daughter, and to rejoice with him. The magistrate will be furiously enraged, and exclaim, Dog, is it possible that being a leather dresser thou durst marry the daughter of the chief magistrate? Do thou then reply, My lord, my ambition was to be ennobled by your alliance, and as I have married your lordship's daughter, the mean appellation of leather dresser will soon be forgotten and lost in the glorious title of the son-in-law of your lordship. I shall be promoted under your protection, and purified from the odor of the tan-pit, so that my offspring will smell as sweet as that of Syed. I did as the lady had directed me, and having bribed the chief of the leather dressers, he accompanied me with the body of his trade and a numerous party of musicians, vocal and instrumental, to my father-in-law's house, before which they began to sing and dance with great clamour, every now and then crying out, Long live our noble kingsman! Long live the son-in-law of the chief magistrate! The magistrate inquired into the cause of our intrusive rejoicing, when I told him my kinsfolk were congratulating me upon my alliance with this illustrious house, and come to thank him for the honour he had done the whole body of leather dressers in my person. The chief magistrate, on hearing this, was passionately enraged, and abused me, but reflecting that without my consent the supposed disgrace of his noble house could not be done away, he became calm and offered me money to divorce his daughter. At first I pretended unwillingness, but at length affecting to be moved by his earnest entreaties, accepted 40 purses of gold, which he gave to me to repudiate my deformed wife, and I returned home with a lightened heart. The day following the lady came to my warehouse, when I thanked her for having freed me from my ridiculous marriage, and begged her to accept of me as a husband. To this she consented, but said she feared, too meanly born for me to marry, as her father was but a cook, though of eminence in his way and very rich. I replied, Even though he were a leather dresser, thy charms would grace a throne. In short, my lord, we were married, and have lived together very happily from the day of our union to the present time. Such is my story, but it is not so surprising as that of the learned man and his pupil, whose adventures were among the miracles of the age, which I will relate. End of section 18. Recording by Beth Blakely.
The Arabian Nights Entertainments, Vol.4, translated by Jonathan Scott. Section 19. Story of the Three Sharpers and the Sultan. Story of the retired sage and his pupil, related to the Sultan by the second lunatic. There was a learned and devout sage, who in order to enjoy his studies and contemplations uninterrupted, had secluded himself from the world in one of the cells of the principal mosque of the city, which he never left but upon the most pressing occasions. He had led this retired life some years, when a boy one day entered his cell, and earnestly begged to be received as his pupil and domestic. The sage liked his appearance, consented to his request, inquired who were his parents and whence he came, but the lad could not inform him, and said, Ask not who I am, for I am an orphan, and know not whether I belong to heaven or earth. The sheik did not press him, and the boy served him with the most undeviating punctuality and attention for 12 years, during which he received his instructions in every branch of learning, and became a most accomplished youth. At the end of the 12 years, the youth one day heard some young men praising the beauty of the Sultan's daughter, and saying that her charms were unequaled by those of all the princesses of the age. This discourse excited his curiosity to behold so lovely a creature. He repaired to his master, saying, My lord, I understand that the Sultan hath a most beautiful daughter, and my soul longs ardently for an opportunity of beholding her, if only for an instant. The sage exclaimed, What have such as we to do, my son, with the daughters of sovereigns or of others? We are a secluded order, and should refrain ourselves from associating with the great ones of this world. The old man continued to warn his pupil against the vanities of the age, and to divert him from his purpose. But the more he advised and remonstrated, the more intent the youth became on his object, which affected his mind so much that he grew very uneasy and was continually weeping. The sage, observing his distress, was afflicted at it, and at length said to the youth, "Will one look at the princess satisfy thy wishes?" "It shall," replied the pupil. The sage then anointed one of his eyes with a sort of ointment, when lo, he became to appearance as a man divided into half, and the sage ordered him to go and hop about the city. The youth obeyed his commands, but he had no sooner got into the street than he was surrounded by a crowd of passengers, who gazed with astonishment at his appearance. The report of so strange a phenomenon as a half-man soon spread throughout the city, and reached the palace of the Sultan, who sent for the supposed monster to the presence. The youth was conveyed to the palace, where the whole court gazed upon him with wonder, after which he was taken into the harem to gratify the curiosity of the women. He beheld the princess, and was fascinated by the brilliancy of her charms, insomuch that he said to himself, "If I cannot wed her, I will put myself to death." The youth, being at length dismissed from the palace, returned home, his heart tortured with love for the daughter of the Sultan. On his arrival, the sage inquired if he had seen the princess. "I have," replied the youth, "but one look is not enough, and I cannot rest until I shall sit beside her and feast my eyes till they are wearied with gazing upon her." "Alas, my son," exclaimed the old man, "I fear for thy safety. We are religious men, and should avoid temptations, nor does it become us to have anything to do with the Sultan." To this the youth replied, "My lord, unless I shall sit beside her, and touch her neck with my hands, I shall, through despair, put myself to death." At these words, the sage was alarmed for the safety of his pupil, and said to himself, "I will, if possible, preserve this amiable youth, and perchance Allah may gratify his wishes." He then anointed both his eyes with an ointment, which had the effect of rendering him invisible to human sight. After this he said, "Go, my son, and gratify thy wishes, but return again, and be not too long absent from thy duty." The youth hastened toward the royal palace, which he entered unperceived, and proceeded into the harem, where he seated himself near the daughter of the Sultan. For some time he contented himself with gazing on her beauty, but at length, extending his hands, touched her softly on the neck. As soon as she felt his touch, the princess, alarmed, shrieked out violently, and exclaimed, "I seek refuge with Allah from Satan the accursed." Her mother and the ladies present, affrighted at her outcries, eagerly inquired the cause when she said, "Eblis, or some other evil spirit, hath this instant touched me on the neck." Upon this the mother was alarmed, and sent for her nurse, who, when informed of what had happened, declared that nothing was so specific to drive away evil spirits as the smoke of camel's hair, a quantity of which was instantly brought, and, being set fire to, the smoke of it filled the whole apartment, and so affected the eyes of the young man that they watered exceedingly, when he unthinkingly wiped them with his handkerchief, so that with his tears the ointment was soon washed off. The ointment was no sooner wiped away from his eyes than the young man became visible, and the princess, her mother, and the ladies all at once uttered a general cry of astonishment and alarm, upon which the eunuchs rushed into the apartment. Seeing the youth, they surrounded him, beat him unmercifully, then bound him with cords, and dragged him before the Sultan, whom they informed of his having been found in the royal harem. The Sultan, enraged, sent for an executioner, and commanded him to seize the culprit, to clothe him in a black habit patched over with flame color, to mount him upon a camel, and, after parading with him through the streets of the city, to put him to death. The executioner took the young man, dressed him as he had been directed, placed him upon the camel, and led him through the city, preceded by guards and a crier who bawled out, "Behold, the merited punishment of him who has dared to violate the sanctuary of the royal harem." The procession was followed by an incalculable crowd of people, who were astonished at the beauty of the young man, and the little concern he seemed to feel at his own situation. At length the procession arrived in the square before the great mosque, when the sage, disturbed by the noise and concourse of the people, looked from the window of his cell and beheld the disgraceful situation of his pupil. He was moved to pity, and instantly calling upon the genie, for by his knowledge of magic and every abstruse science he had them all under his control, commanded them to bring him the youth from the camel, and place in his room, without being perceived, some superannuated man. They did so, and when the multitude saw the youth, as it were, transformed into a well-known, venerable sheik, they were stricken with awe and said, "Heavens! The young man turns out to be a reverend chief of the herb sellers." For the old man had long been accustomed to dispose of greens and sugar cane at the college gate near the great mosque, and was the oldest in his trade. The executioner, on beholding the change of appearance in his prisoner, was confounded. He returned to the palace with the old man upon the camel, and followed by the crowd. He hastened to the Sultan and said, "My lord, the young man is vanished, and in his room became seated upon the camel this venerable sheik, well known to the whole city." On hearing this, the Sultan was alarmed and said to himself, "Whoever has been able to perform this can do things much more surprising. He may depose me from my kingdom." The Sultan's fears increased so much that he was at a loss how to act. He summoned his vizier and said, "Advise me what to do in the affair of this strange youth, for I am utterly confounded." The vizier for some time inclined his head towards the ground in profound thought, then, addressing the Sultan, said, "My lord, no one could have done this but by the help of genie, or by a power which we cannot comprehend, and he may possibly, if irritated, do you in future a greater injury respecting your daughter. I advise, therefore, that you cause it to be proclaimed throughout the city that whoever has done this, if he will appear before you, shall have pardon on the word of a sultan, which can never be broken. Should he then surrender himself, espouse him to your daughter, when perhaps his mind may be reconciled by her love. He has already beheld her, and seen the ladies of the harem, so that nothing can save your honor but his union with the princess." The Sultan approved the advice of his vizier. The proclamation was issued, and the crier proceeded through several streets, till at length he reached the square of the great mosque. The pupil, hearing the proclamation, was enraptured, and running to his patron, declared his intention of surrendering himself to the Sultan. "My son," said the sage, "why shouldst thou do so? Hast thou not already suffered sufficiently?" The youth replied, "Nothing shall prevent me." Upon which the sage exclaimed, "Go, then, my son, and my midnight prayers shall attend thee." The youth now repaired to the hammam, and having bathed, dressed himself in his richest habit, after which he discovered himself to the crier, who conducted him to the palace. He made a profound obeisance to the Sultan, at the same time uttering an eloquent prayer for his long life and prosperity. The Sultan was struck with his manly beauty, the gracefulness of his demeanor, and the propriety of his delivery, and said, "Young stranger, who art thou, and from whence dost thou come?" "I am," replied the youth, "the half-man whom you saw, and have done what you are already acquainted with." The Sultan now requested him to sit in the most honorable place, and entered into conversation on various subjects. He put to him several difficult questions in science, to which the youth replied with such judgment that his abilities astonished him, and he said to himself, "This young man is truly worthy of my daughter." He then addressed him, saying, "Young man, my wish is to unite thee to my daughter, for thou hast already seen her, also her mother, and after what has passed, no one will marry her." The youth replied, "I am ready in obedience, but must advise with my friends." "Go, then," said the Sultan, "consult with thy friends, and return quickly." The young man repaired to the sage, and having informed him of what had passed between himself and the Sultan, signified his wish to marry the princess, when the sheik replied, "Do so, my son. There can be in the measure no crime, as it is a lawful alliance." "But I wish," said the youth, "to invite the Sultan to visit you." "By all means," answered the sage. "My lord," rejoined the pupil, Since I first came, and you honored me in your service, I have beheld you in no other residence but this confined cell, from which you have never stirred, night or day. How can I invite the Sultan here?" "My son," exclaimed the sheik, "go to the Sultan, rely upon Allah, who can work miracles in favor of whom he chooseth, and say unto him, My patron greets thee, and requires thy company to an entertainment 5 days hence." The youth did as he was directed, and having returned to his master, waited upon him as before, but anxiously wishing for the 5th day to arrive. On the 5th day, the sage said to his impatient pupil, "Let us remove to our own house, that we may prepare for the reception of the Sultan, whom you must conduct to me." They arose and walked, till on coming to a ruinous building about the middle of the city, the walls of which were fallen in heaps, the sheik said, "My son, this is my mansion. Hasten and bring the Sultan." The pupil in astonishment exclaimed, "My lord, this abode is a heap of ruins. How can I invite the Sultan here? It would only disgrace us." "Go," repeated the sage, "and dread not the consequences." Upon this the youth departed, but as he went on, could not help saying to himself, "Surely my master must be insane, or means to make a jest of us." When he had reached the palace, he found the Sultan expecting him, upon which he made his obeisance and said, "Will my lord honor me by his company?" The Sultan arose, mounted his horse, and attended by his whole court, followed the youth to the place chosen by the venerable sheik. It now appeared a royal mansion, at the gates of which were ranged numerous attendants in costly habits, respectfully waiting. The young man, at the sight of this transformed appearance, was confounded in such a manner that he could hardly retain his senses. He said to himself, "It was but this instant that I beheld this place a heap of ruins, yet now it is a palace far more magnificent than any belonging to this Sultan. I am astonished, but must keep this secret to myself." The Sultan alighted, as did also his courtiers, and entered the palace. They were surprised and delighted at the splendor of the first court, but much more so at the superior magnificence of a second, into which they were ushered and introduced into a spacious hall, where they found the venerable sheik sitting to receive them. The Sultan made a low obeisance, upon which the sage just moved his head, but did not rise. The Sultan then sat down, when the sheik greeted him, and they entered into conversation on various subjects, but the senses of the Sultan were confounded at the dignified demeanor of his host, and the splendid objects around him. At length, the sheik desired his pupil to knock at a door and order breakfast to be brought in, which he did, when lo, the door opened, and there entered 100 slaves, bearing upon their heads golden trays, on which were placed dishes of agate, cornelian, and other stones, filled with various eatables, which they arranged in order before the Sultan. He was astonished, for he had nothing so magnificent in his own possession. He then partook of the sumptuous collation, as did also the venerable sheik, and all the courtiers, till they were satisfied, after which they drank coffee and sherbets of various sorts, when the Sultan and the sage conversed on religious and literary subjects, and the former was edified by the remarks of the latter. When it was noon, the sheik again desired his pupil to knock at another door, and order dinner to be brought in. He had no sooner done so, than immediately 100 slaves, different from the former, entered, bearing trays of the richest viands. They spread the cloth before the Sultan and arranged the dishes, which were each thickly set with precious stones, at which he was more astonished than before. When all had eaten till they were satisfied, basins and ewers, some of gold and others of agate, were carried round, and they washed their hands, after which the sheik said to the Sultan, "Have you fixed what my son must give as the dower of your daughter?" To this the Sultan replied, "I have already received it." This he said out of compliment, but the sheik replied, "My lord, the marriage cannot be valid without a dower." He then presented a vast sum of money, with many jewels, for the purpose to his pupil, after which he retired with the Sultan into a chamber, and arrayed him in a splendid habit. Rich dresses were also given to each of his attendants according to their rank. The Sultan then took leave of the sheik, and returned with his intended son-in-law to the palace. When evening arrived, the young man was introduced into the apartment of the princess, which he found spread with the richest carpets, and perfumed with costly essences, but his bride was absent, at which he was somewhat surprised, but supposed her coming was put off till midnight, for which he waited with impatience. Midnight came, but no bride appeared, when 1,000 uneasy sensations afflicted his mind, and he continued in restless anxiety till morning. Nor were the father and mother of the princess less impatient, for supposing she was with her husband, they waited anxiously and were mortified at the delay. At daylight, the mother, unable to bear longer suspense, entered the chamber, when the young man, rather angrily, inquired what had delayed the coming of his bride. "She entered before thee," replied the mother. "I have not seen her," answered the bridegroom. Upon this the sultana shrieked with affright, calling aloud on her daughter, for she had no other child but her. Her cries alarmed the sultan, who, rushing into the apartment, was informed that the princess was missing, and had not been seen since her entrance in the evening. Search was now made in every quarter of the palace, but in vain, and the sultan, sultana, and the bridegroom were involved in the deepest distress. To account for the sudden disappearance of the princess, be it known that a genie used often to divert himself with visiting the harem of the sultan, and happening to be there on the marriage night, was so captivated by the charms of the bride that he resolved to steal her away. Accordingly, having rendered himself invisible, he waited in the nuptial chamber, and upon her entering bore her off, and soared into the air. At length he alighted with his prey in a delightful garden, far distant from the city, placed the princess in a shady arbor, and set before her delicious fruits, but contented himself with gazing upon her beauty. The young bridegroom, when recovered from his first alarm, bethought himself of his tutor, and, together with the sultan, repaired to the palace where the splendid entertainment had been given. Here they found everything in the same order as on the day of festivity, and were kindly received by the venerable sheik, who, on hearing of the loss of the princess, desired them to be comforted. He then commanded a chafing dish of lighted charcoal to be set before him, and after some moments of contemplation, cast into it some perfumes, over which he pronounced incantations. He had scarcely ended them when, lo, the earth shook, whirlwinds arose, lightnings flashed, and clouds of dust darkened the air, from which speedily descended winged troops, bearing superb standards and massive spears. In the center of them appeared 3 sultans of the genii, who, bowing low before the sheik, exclaimed all at once, "Master, hail! We are come to obey thy commands." The sheik now addressed them, saying, "My orders are that you instantly bring me the accursed spirit who hath carried off the bride of my son." When the genie replied, "To hear is to obey," and immediately detached 50 of their followers to reconduct the princess to her chamber, and drag the culprit to the presence of the sage. These commands were no sooner issued than they were performed. 10 of the genii carefully conveyed the bride to her apartment, while the rest, having seized the offending genie, dragged him before the sage, who commanded the 3 sultans to burn him to ashes, which was executed in an instant. All this was done in the presence of the sultan, who was wrapped in astonishment, and viewed with awe the tremendously gigantic figures of the genii, wondering at the submissive readiness with which they obeyed the commands of the venerable sheik. When the offending genie was consumed to ashes, the sheik renewed his incantations, during which the sultans of the genii, with their followers, bowed themselves before him, and when he had ended, vanished from sight. The sultan and the bridegroom, having taken leave of the sheik, returned to the palace, where all was now gladness for the safe return of the princess. The marriage was consummated, and the young man was so happy with his bride that he did not quit the harem for 7 days. On the 8th, the sultan ordered public rejoicings to be made, and invited all the inhabitants of the city to feast at the royal cost, causing it to be proclaimed that no one, either rich or poor, should for 3 days presume to eat at home, light a fire, or burn a lamp in his own house, but all repair to the nuptial festival of the daughter of the sultan. Ample provision was made for all comers in the courts of the palace, and the officers of the household attended day and night to serve their guests according to their quality. During one of the nights of this grand festival, the sultan, being anxious to know if his proclamation was generally obeyed, resolved to walk through the streets of the city in disguise. Accordingly, he and his vizier, in the habit of dervishes of Persia, having quitted the palace privately, began their excursion and narrowly examined several streets. At length, they came to a close alley, in one of the houses of which they perceived a light, and heard the sound of voices. When they had reached the door, they heard a person say to another, "Our Sultan understands not how to treat properly, nor is he liberal, since the poor have it not in their option to partake of the costly feast he has prepared for his daughter's nuptials. He should have distributed his bounty among the wretched, who dare not presume to enter the palace in their ragged garments, by sending it to their home." The Sultan, upon hearing this, said to the vizier, "We must enter this house," and knocked at the door, when a person cried out, "Who is there?" "Guests," replied the Sultan. "You shall be welcome to what we have," answered the person, and opened the door. On entering, the Sultan beheld 3 mean-looking old men, one of whom was lame, the second broken-backed, and the third wry-mouthed. He then inquired the cause of their misfortunes, to which they answered, "Our infirmities proceeded from the weaknesses of our understandings." The Sultan upon this replied in a whisper to his vizier that at the conclusion of the festival he should bring the 3 men to his presence, in order that he might learn of their adventures. When they had tasted of their homely fare, the Sultan and the vizier rose up, and having presented the 3 maimed companions with a few dinars, took leave and departed. They strolled onwards. It was now near midnight when they reached a house in which, through a lattice, they could perceive 3 girls with their mother, eating a slender meal, during which, at intervals, one of them sung, and the other 2 laughed and talked. The Sultan resolved to enter the house, and commanded the vizier to knock at the door, which he did, when one of the sisters cried out, "Who knocks at our door at this advanced time of night?" "We are 2 foreign dervishes," replied the vizier, to which the ladies answered, "We are women of virtue, and have no men in our house to whom you can be introduced. Repair to the festival of the Sultan, who will entertain you." "Alas," continued the vizier, "we are strangers, unacquainted with the way to the palace, and dread lest the magistrate of the police should meet and apprehend us. We beg that you will afford us lodging till daylight. We will then depart, and you need not apprehend from us any improper behavior." When the mother of the ladies heard this, she pitied the strangers, and commanded them to open the door, upon which the Sultan and vizier, having entered, paid their respects and sat down, but the former, on observing the beauty of the sisters and their elegant demeanor, could not contain himself, and said, "How comes it that you dwell by yourselves, have no husbands or any male to protect you?" The younger sister replied, "Impertinent dervish, withhold thy inquiries. Our story is surprising, but unless thou wert Sultan and thy companion vizier, you could not appreciate our adventures." The Sultan, upon this remark, became silent on the subject, and they discoursed upon indifferent matters till near daylight, when the pretended dervishes took a respectful leave and departed. At the door, the Sultan commanded the vizier to mark it, so that he might know it again, being resolved, when the nuptial festival should be concluded, to send for the ladies and hear their story. On the last evening of the festival, the Sultan bestowed dresses of honor on all his courtiers, and on the following day, affairs returning to their usual course, he commanded his vizier to bring before him the 3 maimed men, and ordered them to relate the cause of their misfortunes, which they did as follows. End of section 19. Recording by Melody Coriati.
By Jonathan Scott. Section 20. Story of the 3 Sharpers and the Sultan. The story of the broken-backed schoolmaster. Formerly, O mighty Sultan was a schoolmaster, and had under my tuition nearly 70 scholars, of whose manners I was as careful as of their learning. So much did I make them respect me, that whenever I sneezed, they laid down their writing boards, stood up with arms crossed, and with one voice exclaimed, "God have mercy upon our tutor!" To which I replied, "May he have mercy upon me and you, and all who have children." If any one of the boys did not join in this prayer, I used to beat him severely. One fine afternoon my scholars requested leave to visit a certain garden some distance from the town, which I granted, and they clubbed their pittances to purchase sweetmeats and fruits. I attended them on this excursion, and was as much delighted as themselves with the pleasure they enjoyed and their childish gambols. When evening approached, we returned homewards, and on the way my boys, having fatigued themselves with play, as well as eaten much sweets and fruit, were seized with extreme thirst, of which they heavily complained. At length we reached a draw-well, but alas, it had no bucket or cord. I pitied their situation and resolved, if possible, to relieve them. I requested them to give me their turbans, which I tied to each other, but as they were altogether not long enough to reach the water, I fixed one of the turbans round my body, and made them let one down into the well, where I filled a small cup I had with me, which they drew up repeatedly till their thirst was satisfied. I then desired them to draw me up again, which they attempted, and I had reached nearly the mouth of the well, when I was unfortunately seized with a fit of sneezing, upon which the boys mechanically, as they had been accustomed to do in school, one and all let go their hold, crossed their arms, and exclaimed, "God have mercy upon our venerable tutor!" Well, I tumbled at once to the bottom of the well and broke my back. I cried out from the agony of pain, and the children ran on all sides for help. At length some charitable passengers drew me out, and placing me upon an ass carried me home, where I languished for a considerable time, and never could recover my health sufficiently again to attend my school. Thus did I suffer for my foolish pride, for had I not been so tenacious of respect from my scholars, they would not upon my sneezing have let go their hold and broken my back. When the broken-backed schoolmaster had finished his story, the old man with the wry mouth thus began. End of section 20. Recording by Beth Blakely.